那个我Betty 发的，等一下，现在是 live 了吗？哦，在 YouTube 是吧？OK，
快了，马上了，对，没事，这个链接
等一下下午，
发出去，
如果 start 的话，
没人看不到。
记得说一声。
没 start。
那个我在群里面发了一个，就是 Betty 在他们群里宣传的时候，那边他们群里人遇到的问题，谁去 address 一下，进下去。
所以我是先介绍完了之后，然后邀请你来说，是吧？Tiger，我是介绍你是 Tiger 河还是浩洋河？
都行。
浩洋吧 ，Tiger 听着傻傻的。
嗯。
To give an opening remark。
大家准备一下，可以开那个 webinar 了，其实。
开 webinar 开始放视频 ，Cindy 你来放还是我放
？Start 一下吧。
不是，先别 start，你先弄好是谁放 webinar，不是谁放视频。
你来放吧。
到底是谁啊？
你。
我。
不
行，我这边我放这个我投屏，我这个就不好搞了。
我放可能会卡，而且声音好像有点问题。
是放什么？我可以试一下。
就放那个推文里面，就是那个一开始的那个视频。
有点困难感觉。
我把那个推文转给你。我们速度试一下吧。
因为我想问一下，我是那个 biotech panel， 那个 panel 是今天晚上是明天晚上？
您好，不好意思啊，刚才没看到您已经来了。那个 biotech panel 应该是明天晚上。
OK， 那我是弄错了。OK， 那我明天晚上再见。OK， 没问题。OK， 谢谢。OK， 拜拜。
拜拜。
OK，所以嘉宾走了是吗？
视频没
是的，
声音。
是的。那个 Amy，你到时候你也注意看一下你的那个 Zoom 的 DM， 好吧？
我如果在投屏的话，我是看不见的。
哦shit！
所以我根本就
那你
看不见。
你手机放前面的时候，你能看见微信吗？就你不用回消息，你就那啥就行。
我能，但是我手机会震啊。
The webinar has started。
等一下啊，
怎么开了？谁
我现
开了？
我现在说话，他们听得见吗？
听得见，听得见。
Okay, we will be starting the summit now. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 10th CMU Summit. I'm Amy, Vice President of CMU Summit. And on behalf of the summit, I would like to extend a warm welcome and heartfelt thanks to all the experts, scholars, guests, and students attending this event. So first, I would like to welcome our President Haoyang He to give an opening remark.
All right, thank you, Amy. First of all, on behalf of the 10th CMU Summit on US-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship, I'd like to express our warmest welcome to all of you. The annual CMU Summit on US-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship is one of the most prominent innovation center summits held by a student organization in North America. Our mission is to build a bilateral bridge for communications and collaborations between the US and China in fields of innovation and entrepreneurship, to support innovators and entrepreneurs from both countries, and to facilitate technological and business developments. Our annual CMU Summit and New Venture Competition have attracted over 7,000 audience, 800 startup projects, 500 industry leaders, and are covered by over 100 media worldwide. This year, at the start of a new decade, we celebrate the 10th CMU Summit anniversary. We are very fortunate that for the past 10 years, we have synchronized with the integration of innovation and entrepreneurial community from two sides of the ocean. Every CMU Summit is a big inventory of development of science and technology. Every CMU Summit is a review of Sino-US cooperation and innovation. And every CMU Summit is a new starting point for technological development and breakthroughs. Today, we meet again at this annual event for innovators, and we are more than excited. We have witnessed great innovations and technological advancements in the past year. During our 3-day event, we will review the past and envision the future, explore brand new opportunities for collaborations, and tackle challenges that we may together face as an international community. Due to the ongoing pandemic, we have moved the 10th CMU Summit online. At the start of 2020s, we would like to invite you to join us to review the past decade of technological advancement and consider possibilities for innovations in the years to come. This year, adjusting to the virtual setting, we will host online keynote speeches, panel discussions, lecture series, demo day, and career fair. This year's panel discussion and lecture series topics include smart commuting, creativity in new media, biotech, robotics, smart infrastructure, VR and AR, online education, and traditional industries. To present you with unique perspectives and diverse views, we have invited over 40 esteemed speakers, including prominent scholars, industry leaders, venture capitalists, and promising entrepreneurs. We hope that our 10th CMU Summit will inspire you with new ideas and opportunities. Last but not least, I would also like to give special thanks to all of our speakers, partners, and collaborators. We couldn't have gone this far without all your support. I would also like to thank all participants for interest in the 10th CMU Summit. We wish you every success in your career and studies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tiger. So in the following 3 days, we will present you with 6 keynote speeches, 8 panel discussions and lecture series, 1 demo day, and 1 career fair. In keynote speech, each speaker will combine entrepreneurship, technology, and business to guide the pioneers of the future in the 30-minute talk. In panel discussion, professor will cover 7 topics, including smart commuting, creativity in new media, smart infrastructure, robotics, VR and AR, online education, and biotechnology. Also, we will hold a lecture series where lecturers will talk about how new technology drives the transformation of traditional industry. In the demo day, 8 entrepreneur teams will showcase their business to investors and judges. And in career fair, 12 companies will present their information session and conduct Q&A session with students. For more information on the summit, we have our official website and WeChat account, and we are also active on social media such as Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. If you have any questions, please email us or add our summit helpers on WeChat. So now we will welcome our first keynote speakers, Marshall Hebert. Marshall Hebert is a professor of robotics at Carnegie Mellon University and the Dean of School of Computer Science. He joined us in 1984. His interests include computer vision, in particular recognition in images and video data, model building and object recognition from 3D data, and perception for mobile robots and for intelligent vehicles. He will give us a speech about people-oriented system in AI. Dean Hebert, you're on.
Thank you. Let me pause for a second while I'm sharing my screen and starting the presentation. Hold on just 1 second, it's starting now. It'll take a minute. Okay. Okay, can you see the presentation okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. What I want to talk to you briefly today is about some work that we're doing in the School of Computer Science, which, by the way, is illustrated here with its 7 departments. And specifically work in the area of using people data to help people, and trying to highlight, illustrate some of the key challenges that we need to address when using those kind of data for this kind of purpose. And I will illustrate that through the work of several of our faculty in the School of Computer Science. So when we talk about this, what we're talking about is the idea of having data that is provided by people, being able to use machine learning tools to do essentially 3 things. One is to build models of the data that are predictive of some interesting features. The second one is to forecast, that is predict things that will happen in the future based on that data. And the third one is based on those models and those forecasting models to be able to make decisions that are useful and hopefully can improve people's lives. Now, why do we talk about this specifically as opposed to other kinds of data? Why can't we just use our off-the-shelf learning techniques and simply apply them to this data? Well, there's a number of reasons. The first one is that it's highly error-prone data. The way it's collected, typically, it's uncertain. It's definitely incomplete. It's very difficult to get complete sets of data. It's distributed. Typically, the data comes from different places. It's localized at different places, and it's very difficult to aggregate in a single data set. Privacy is important. We need to maintain privacy, not only privacy at the individual level, but privacy at the entity level. And it is biased. Why? Because, well, people are biased when they're going to enter data. That data is going to be affected by the kind of bias that people naturally have. Much of the data is subjective data. It's not objective data like what you get from a sensor that takes some measurements. It's actually subjective because a person is actually in the middle of providing that data. So the question is, what kind of research do we need to do to address those problems, and what kind of research are we doing to address those problems? The other thing that we need to consider is, as we get the output of those systems, they are used in a complex context, basically of people, of society. It needs to be fair and equitable. You know, if you simply, again, plug in your off-the-shelf ML components, those components have no concept of the effect of the output in the broader context. So we need to be able to have tools that will ensure that the way those techniques are used actually leads to fair and equitable decisions. And finally, it needs to be explainable. And this is particularly important in the context of decisions that are made to implement policies or things that will affect people's activities. This is particularly important in this case, so we can explain how those decisions are arrived at. So let me talk about first building models, and I'll take example from the work of Professor Niharsha in the machine learning department. And just to make this a little bit more specific as to what I mean by this people-generated data, those are a couple of examples here of customer satisfaction data, ratings data. All of those things are fall into that category. Remembering again that they are generated in a distributed fashion from very different stations. They can be on personal devices as well as more centralized sources. So those are more example of this. The kind of data that we're looking at in this kind of work, I mentioned product rating, but this includes grading, that includes anything that has to do with reviewing, for example, for hiring, for admissions, for publication, evaluation of work, and even for healthcare. A lot of healthcare has to do with, of course, what I would call kind of objective measurements from sensors and so forth, imaging, etc. But a lot of it is subjective and has to do with questionnaire, has to do with people provided data. So there again, we are faced with that problem of incomplete, imprecise, uncertain, biased data. So those are the kind of things that we need to look at in this context. So let's tell you a little bit more about the kind of specific issues about the data that one needs to look at. And again, this is from the work of Professor Niharsha that I use as illustration. This is an example on this slide from peer review data. So there, the data is basically review data, reviewing work, basically. So we again have all those issues. We have issues of subjectivities, that is the importance of different features that are being evaluated varies from people to people. So that leads to two things. One is, again, it's subjective data. It's not something that you can assume there is some standard procedure to calibrate it. So it's subjective and it's miscalibrated because different people are going to rate things in a different way. There is bias, meaning that certain ratings are going to be higher or lower based on features like geographic location, for example, that are not, in fact, germane to the actual task at hand. Okay, it's noisy because, of course, it depends on the context in which the person enters the data. And of course, this can be even an adversarial situation in that there is also the potential from deliberate fraud or inaccurate data. So those are the kind of things that we need to look at, just to give you a sense of what we're trying to do there. That is the kind of thing that we need to look at in this people-generated data. And again, the point here is that this requires new techniques, new algorithm to address those issues. This is not something that we can address by simply tweaking the existing ML tools to deal with this kind of data. In particular, this becomes even more important if we want to have rigorous guarantees, right? This is something that is generally lacking in AI and ML system, but is particularly lacking when we try to use now human-provided data, people-provided data. It's important, of course, to be able to deploy that in the real world and measure impact. It's important, but unfortunately, it's very difficult, in particular in terms of the metrics that can be employed. In this particular case, this was deployed in a test case of peer review. And finally, this is an area where we need to expand greatly what we mean by research in AI and ML. Okay, and we need to expand it far beyond the core research to things like psychology, economics, any of those areas that help us understand human behavior and data acquisition and so forth. So those were some ideas on research in the area of modeling this kind of data. I should mention also a central issue with this type of data is, of course, privacy. Privacy, not only, as I said, in terms of individual privacy, but also privacy in the sense of preserving the rights and of individual entities that produce that data. So I'll just say one word about this, and there's lots of work at CMU from Virginia Smith, Hamid Tawakar, and many others, in the idea of going away from this notion of centralized processing of that data, where all privacy is lost because everything has to be aggregated. All the information has to be aggregated at one place that will have access to all that information, and to think about much more distributed way of processing the data, and basically doing privacy preserving processing of that data. Now, this is not a new idea, but what I'm advocating here, if you will, is that as we move further and further with that human-provided data, this issue of distributed ML and that issue of privacy becomes far more prevalent and becomes an even more important research priority. So that's another one of those research priorities that we pursue. So this was a few words about modeling. Let me say a few words about forecasting, right? So forecasting is not being satisfied with modeling that data and its relationship to output, but to actually forecast the evolution in the future. Now, of course, there's a lot of work on this, and let me give you a couple of examples of the kind of things that we're trying to do at CMU. The first one is by now a very well-known example, and this was motivated, of course, by the current pandemic. This is building on the work actually, so the current work is very well known, the previous work not necessarily as much. And the previous work had to do with doing forecasting of epidemics, and in particular of the flu. What this requires is to be able to aggregate very disparate data, right, from many different types. So there is that problem of heterogeneous data. Some of it is medical data, quantitative data. Some of that is completely subjective data. Again, human-generated data, like I showed earlier. For example, answer to questionnaires and surveys, things like that are extremely subjective, but taken together with the other feature can help us do actually accurate forecasting. This is a view of what was done. This is a little bit old now. This is from last year, but this shows what that group, the Delphi group, was trying to do by doing very fine-grained data characterization and forecasting. In other words, not just at the level of growth trend but at the level of individual zip code, individual counties, and things like this, which is much more challenging. So those are various visualization here of different features like symptoms from surveys from Facebook and Google, as well as doctor's visit, and then the combination of those to view current estimate of activity and prediction as well over a small time window. So this is an example here of the prediction. Of course, the game here is, again, two things. One is to be able to combine as many types of data as possible and as disparate as possible, including that error-prone, noisy, biased, subjective people-provided data, number one. And number two, being able to do this forecasting on as long of a horizon as possible. I think this is a 7-day here prediction. It can do better now. So that's one aspect of what we mean by forecasting, and one example of the kind of work that we do. There are many other aspects. This is another examples from a completely different context now. Here, the data has to do with motion data, basically behavior data of a person. If you look at this person in red here, it's very likely that she's going to cross that street, that sidewalk, crosswalk. It's very unlikely that she's going to make a sharp right, and extremely unlikely that she's going to suddenly go diagonal across the intersection. So the point here is very simple, that this is, looking at this is kind of an obvious observation. It's obvious that we can just look at this picture and make those kind of predictions. The question is, how can we make those kind of predictions automatically? And if you think about it, what that requires is a model of a very complex decision process that we need to model. How to model this from preferably limited data by using perhaps prior knowledge and model about human behavior and decision process, and how to do this in more complex environment. This is an example here. This is work from Chris Kitani from the Robotics Institute. And what you're going to see here on this person on the left, number 18, what you're going to see if the video works, which is not working right now. Okay, I'm sorry, I apologize, the video is not working. So at least on the static picture, what you can see is from this person working on the left, 18, you see multiple paths generated. Those multiple paths are forecasting of possible future decision of this person. Now, this is a complex process because not only it is dynamic, everything moves, of course, of the person as well. It requires understanding of not only the environment, but also the decision process of that person. But it also requires interaction with others. I know it's a little bit hard to see here because the video is not playing, but there's a lot of agents moving at the same time. So what this person is going to do in the future depends on what others are going to do, and what others are going to do depends on what this person is going to do. So there's a whole game theoretic kind of problem that goes around that puts another dimension on the problem that is much more complex than just a single kind of straight pipeline prediction of forecast. So that's the kind of thing that we are looking at in terms of forecasting. This is another example here of how this can be used, to help people, how this can be used to work with people. Again, in a different context, this is the work of Professor Henny and Money and the Robotics Institute. And the idea here is to try to use those forecasting models to help with a task that a person needs to carry out. So on the left, and unfortunately, I don't know why those movies are not working, but basically the idea here is that this is a human subject experiment where the person is asked to control a robot with a joystick. It's a very difficult task because of inaccuracies in the robot. And the kind of techniques that I showed earlier can be used to predict to forecast basically what the person's intent is in the future. And by doing this, the system can help the person control that robot manipulator. So this is the this video definitely doesn't work, I'm sorry. So this is an example of applying this forecasting technology to robotics, okay? So the last aspect that I want to say just a few words about is decision. So we need to, given all those capabilities of modeling, forecasting, etc., and understanding data better, we need to be able to make decisions using that data. And let me just say a few words using as an example the work of Raid Ghani, Professor Raid Ghani, who is a professor in the Heinz College and School of Computer Science in the machine learning department. And basically what that group is trying to do is to build systems that can collaborate between AI and human decision to generate decisions, policies, if you will, that are fair and equitable and unbiased. Basically, to be able to make decisions that actually improve the outcome, that actually improve people's life, as opposed to making decisions that optimize some loss function, as we normally do in ML, without paying attention explicitly to the broader context of how they are applied. Okay, so this requires deep understanding of not only all of the human data, human-generated data that I explained earlier, but also deep understanding of the effect of those decisions on actual everyday life, basically. So this is just an example. Right Group has many applications. This is an example here of trying to improve the way resources are dispatched in case of emergency, right? Emergency medical systems, in this case, EMS systems. And by using the right type of AI ML resources, one can show that one can improve dramatically the response time and the allocation of resources of those devices. So again, this is the kind of example that requires deep understanding of both all the data that is presented to the system. Remember, much of it is incomplete, biased, uncertain, error-prone, etc., and subjective. That is the problem on the data side. On the output side, one needs to understand how the impact in the broader context. So those are some questions that this group addresses. Those are very concrete questions, and on the surface, they're very different from each other, right? This all seem very specific. But the game here is that you can build templates out of those kind of questions, and basically say, well, for each of those templates, we basically have a class of AI and ML type of approaches that can be used. And maybe we can build some general approaches, tools that will help us build AI systems that can address those kind of questions, again, to help ultimately to have outcomes that help people. So that's the research that they're trying to do. And I think that's an important direction to go into. In other words, to build AI systems that make decision taking into account from the beginning of the design, the fact that they come from human-generated data and that they're going to make decisions that affect people's lives. This requires tools in basic ML techniques that we need to revisit. Explainability and interpretability is particularly important to be able to basically audit how those decisions are made. And again, paramount throughout all of this research are those issues of bias and fairness, which require, again, new tools, new theories, new mathematical models of how to think about those issues of bias and fairness. So those are the kind of things that we are looking at. I thought I would give you kind of a quick overview of some of the research direction and some of the themes that people are looking at that I think are very important in moving toward systems that use that imperfect human-generated information and data and produce outcomes that are that have a positive impact on people's life. And I will stop here. Hopefully, I'm on time, and I will start the presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Hubert. If we have any questions, the audience can pop their questions at the backstage so we could ask the professor. Okay, so far we haven't seen any questions, so we are going to move on to our first panel today. And thank you again for Professor Hubert.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to our first panel today, smart commuting panel. And let me first introduce the guests. So smart commuting represents the combination of new technologies and traditional automobile industry and the interaction between internet and manufacturing industry. In this panel, we will have John Dolan, Principal System Scientist at the Argo AI Center for Autonomous Vehicle Research, Carol Smith, Senior Research Scientist and Adjunct Instructor in Human-Computer Interaction at CMU Software Engineering Institute, and Nicholas Martellaro, Assistant Professor at Carnegie Mellon's Human-Computer Interaction Institute. And Nicholas will be the moderator for this panel today. So welcome.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, thanks all for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here speaking with Carol and John about autonomous cars, the potential future for autonomous commuting, and where we think technology is today and where the technology may be going and how it may affect us in our everyday lives. Maybe just to kick us off, I'm actually really curious to hear from both of you about where do you think your sort of perception is of where autonomous technology in regards to autonomous driving is today? And what do you think some of your expectations are for the future? Maybe, John, I'll have you start off, given the work that you've been doing.
Sure, that sounds good. I think my remarks will focus mostly on the technology along with a little bit about the applications. But I think, of course, there's been a revolution in autonomous driving. There are a lot of companies that have been established, and there's a fairly mature autonomy architecture that's being used, which has a perception component, motion planning, control, behaviors. There's a pretty strong software development process that's been developed. There are some fairly well-accepted testing protocols and routines, although we'll probably have more to say about that in terms of the needed safety that we have to have in autonomous driving. The deep learning revolution has really improved perception capabilities. So that's something that just within recent years has been pushing things along. And then I think one thing that is important to keep in mind about the current status of autonomous driving is that there's a strong distinction between highway driving, which is far less complicated than urban situations, and then urban environments, in which a lot of unusual and surprising things can happen. So that's just a brief statement of where things are now. And I guess, well, we'll probably get a chance to talk later about, how soon will it be widespread and all those kinds of things. For the future, I think we'll see continued, probably gradual progress. I think one way to characterize the current situation is that maybe 95% or a little bit more, all of the relatively straightforward situations can be dealt with reasonably well, but we're still working on a lot of difficult situations, such as the ones in urban environments. There'll be increasing use of vehicle-to-vehicle technology and vehicle-to-infrastructure, which has benefits. And there's a question of where will the the killer apps be are the places that it'll be introduced first. And I think long range trucking is one, and there are a lot of companies working on that. Last mile delivery is a good application as well. And ride sharing, as we know, Uber and others have been involved with that. And the last thing I'd say about the future is that without solving in a better way than we've been able to so far the safety problem, progress will be mixed or difficult. So that's an important aspect of it. So that's all I have to say initially about it. Anyway, I'll turn it over to Carol.
Yeah, and building on that, yeah, it's still early days. There's just so much work to be done. There are a lot of hard problems that need to be worked on, and just thinking about what is safe legally, personally. We all have different ideas of what that is, and thinking through that. And what is appropriate for the vehicle, aggressive driving versus more conservative driving. Those things are going to vary, and people will have different preferences. And then thinking about the norms for the communities as well. Driving in a very large city is very different than driving in a smaller city. Here in Pittsburgh, we have the Pittsburgh left, which having a vehicle understand that is probably difficult at best. But I'm very hopeful that this technology is going to come to fruition sooner rather than later. I would really like my kids to drive a lot less than I have in my life. It's not the safest activity that we do, certainly. And these vehicles have the opportunity, the potential to save many, many lives eventually. But to John's points about the safety issues, we really have to determine, better ways of keeping people safe, because the vigilance tasks that are required in the current vehicles is really insurmountable for now, as far as safety concerns.
Carol, if you wouldn't mind, just for our guests here, for who may have never visited Pittsburgh, could you describe the Pittsburgh left? And also, I noted that you had talked a little bit about the vigilance problem. Would you mind just describing what that is, just so everyone's on the same page?
Certainly. Yeah, the Pittsburgh left is an odd one to think about, but if you can imagine a 2-lane road where traffic is going in both directions, and if you are paused to turn left into a road, the oncoming traffic that you're facing will actually stop and allow you to make that left turn, which in many cities I've lived in is not possible. It's not even a thing. And here it's very common for a bus even to stop and allow you to turn left in front of them. And my experience in Chicago was not that. A bus was much more likely to just run you over and keep going. And so Pittsburgh has this unique thing, and there are those things that are community specific all over the world, where there may or may not be even any visual indications of what is happening, but people have an understanding. They have a shared experience, and they know how things work in their city. And then on the vigilance tasks, so vigilance tasks, if you can imagine a security guard, they are watching and waiting for something to happen. If they're watching screens in an office building, let's say, that task is very difficult to continue for long periods of time. You're waiting, nothing is happening. In TV shows, it's common to see somebody with their feet up on the desk and they're reading a book because it's just so boring. And that's the task we're asking people to do, and not just to protect a building, but rather to protect themselves, to protect their children, to protect their parents, whoever it is that's in the vehicle. They're being asked to wait, and then immediately respond when the vehicle needs them at the utmost urgency to save their lives. And that is nearly impossible for humans to do. It's just, we aren't made to respond in that way with that kind of urgency, from a point of not at all really needing to pay attention. It's just a really difficult thing for humans to do.
Great, thanks. So actually, as part of also your what you were talking about earlier, you'd mentioned that you're hoping maybe that your children wouldn't have to get driver's licenses. Can you share a little bit more about what actually motivated you to start working in the area of autonomous vehicle development, and how you sort of got started?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So I live here in Pittsburgh, and I live in a neighborhood where I could see the early vehicles driving around the early autonomous vehicles that various groups were working on, and was just very excited about this technology. It seemed like it was improving literally on a regular basis. I was seeing new prototypes driving around and was just getting more and more excited about it, and had the opportunity to go to Uber's ATG group where they were working on self-driving cars, and was very excited to do research there and really try to figure out what would enable trust, what we could do to help people to appropriately trust the vehicles, to be able to understand what the vehicle was doing, why it was doing what it was doing, and to help them get where they needed to go. I really, again, am still extremely hopeful about these technologies, particularly for people with disabilities, to have more independence, to not have to explain anything to another human, but rather to just get in the vehicle and go where they need to go. Huge potential, but and that's why I got into this work. And also, I just feel it really is going to keep people safe eventually. It'll just be a little while.
John, can you tell us a little about how you ended up starting your work in autonomous vehicles?
Sure. My path was a little bit different in that I was working for a long time in field robotics and related sorts of things. And then back in the mid 2000s, around 2005 or 6, a team was getting put together at CMU for the DARPA Urban Challenge. And prior to that, Red Whitaker, who had been very successful in a variety of things, including nuclear remediation robots, had been involved with the so-called Grand Challenge, which was a vehicle that needed to drive through the desert, but the hope was it wouldn't have to deal with any other vehicles because it was being let loose before the other or after the other vehicles, whatever, with an appropriate interval. So that was different from this urban challenge where you actually had to interact with other traffic. So I got involved with that. I ended up leading the behaviors team for that, which was doing tactical decision-making for the driving, like how do you figure out who goes first at the intersection and how do you decide when it's time to change lanes and all those sorts of things. And then in the subsequent years, after we did well in that race, and really that helped in many ways to kick off the current autonomous driving revolution, because a lot of the folks who were involved with that, whether at CMU or elsewhere, have been those who have started these companies. I've been working a lot, and my lab has been working on, again, these behaviors type of questions. How do you predict what other people in the environment are going to do? So the Pittsburgh left would be an example of that. And you may have prior knowledge there. You know, if you know you're in Pittsburgh, then it's more likely that somebody will try that than elsewhere. And then how do you react to those things, including evasive maneuver, maybe for emergency situations, that kind of thing. Another thing for me that played some role is I have a background in the Army. I was on active duty for 4 years and then in the reserves for a long time. And of course, the Department of Defense has stated, although it hasn't been able to attain the goal, that by a certain date, actually now in the past, they wanted to have a certain percentage of autonomous vehicles. So I've worked at the National Robotics Engineering Center on some projects related to that initiative as well.
So I actually find the two paths here, quite interesting. One, years kind of in from sort of the beginning of the autonomous vehicle sort of revolution, and then kind of seeing it happen kind of in your neighborhood, and then joining into that. I'm actually curious now, so maybe we could speak a little bit. Both of you are working now, and these cars are on the road. Can you tell me a little bit about what are your thoughts about how testing is going? The fact that these cars are really out there and the information that we're able to gather from both of your perspectives, I think it's really interesting, both from the technology and from the human side. What are we sort of able to learn because these things are actually on the road today, at least in a testing form? I'll let actually any of you start with that.
Do you want to go first, Carol, or do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I'll go, and then you can fill in all the technical details. So one of the big problems is just the amount of data, is analyzing that data. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. Is yes, we can gather millions and millions and millions of pieces of data, but what do we do with it, and how do we use that to really improve things? So I think that's probably one of the bigger challenges that I see people struggling with, is being able to really use that information adequately. And then there's, if we're on tracks and have much more planned scenarios, that's excellent, because because we're practicing, we're improving continuously. But then in the real world, a bicyclist is going to not pass properly, or a human child is going to bounce their ball and chase it. And, things like that in the real world are a very different thing that you can't model as adequately. And doing that in real life, though, is also not appropriate. We shouldn't have self-driving vehicles, interacting with children for the first time in the street and, in real life. And so figuring out ways to be able to adequately test that with simulations and things like that is really important. But we still have just so much to learn and to do. So there's just a lot of challenges. Human behavior, as John was mentioning, we need to be able to predict, but humans are tough. I may step out off that curb, but then I may change my mind. I may see a friend and I may turn, and it's tough to predict all of what is going to happen. As we all know, those of us who have driven, sometimes people just do wacky things, and it's tough.
Yeah, I think Carol hit the important themes. So there are different ways to approach it. One would be the one that Carol mostly described of, you either try to come up with in simulation as many possible scenarios as you can imagine, or you take real data and you try to make sure you can do a benign case, and then possibly, you hope that you'll be confronted also in those real data with the unusual cases that might come up when you're driving. But the fact of the matter is, as Carol also said, you can't guarantee that every single possible situation that you might see in the real world is going to come up either in simulation or in your real data. So, but that's one general approach. And that's really the one that I think the autonomous driving companies have been taking for the most part, of doing that sort of thing, then going out in the real world, discovering more cases, coming back, iteratively changing, refining the software to be able to handle these things. And then the question is, where does that put us, or how soon will we be able to asymptotically approach a system that we think is safe enough to be on the road? And that's a tough question to answer. Another way of approaching it, which is pretty, I'd say in the early stages at this point, would be to try to sort of formally demonstrate that you have what you could call provable safety. Now, it's hard to imagine that would be able to cover every single case, but there may be some promise in it, and certainly people are working in that area. I'm involved right now with a DARPA project called Assured Autonomy, and the basic idea behind it is to first recognize that there are a lot of learning-enabled components in autonomous systems today, including autonomous cars, and then realize that they're black boxes to some extent. We don't have the same kind of rigorous dynamics equations that we can write down for them that we can for Newtonian mechanics modeled sorts of systems. And therefore, we ask ourselves, can we make any kind of guarantees about their safety? And so we're just starting to look at that. And maybe that'll bear fruit in the future, and these two different approaches can be married up with one another in order to create an overall more safe system. But it's an open question, I think, at this point. And another open question, which is not so much technical, and one that I'll bet Carol has some good things to say about, and I've thought about myself, is what will the public accept, right? Because it may be that they would not accept the same level of safety in an autonomous vehicle that we currently accept for human driving. It would need to be better, perhaps, for human psychology.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Yeah, and the alternative, or the opposite, I guess, situation is, what is acceptable operation? So back when you could drive through Times Square, or if you imagine very, very heavily populated areas, if everyone's jaywalking, the vehicles may never move forward, because it's overly cautious. So they're both sides. So there's what is acceptable safety. Certainly, personally, I think they should be better than us, or what's the point? But on the other side, what's appropriate aggressiveness? How can we make these vehicles, get me to the store, or get me to my appointment, my interview, whatever it is, on time, and the route I want, and in the comfort I want, not hard braking, softer braking, whatever it is. Thinking about all of those features and functions is important as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. I have a quick funny story about that from when we were testing around the Pittsburgh airport. the speed limit when you're driving near the airport to drop people off or to drop your car off is 15 miles an hour. We were driving autonomously and we were adhering to the speed limit. Nobody was happy with us. We were getting people honking at us, et cetera. So if you drive at 15 miles an hour, at least from a psychological standpoint, you run the danger of inducing road rage. So it's not always good to follow the rules.
This is actually, there's stories about some other companies' vehicles that have had similar issues where any incidents they've been a part of have been rear-ending incidents because the drivers behind them aren't used to them driving basically at the speed limit on many roads, whether it's 25 or 30 or 40 miles an hour, where people are driving much faster. I actually want to, this is great. There's a question from the audience here that actually leads in to one of the next things is that I'm curious, based on sort of the technology, based on some of what we're seeing from human acceptability, and based on what many people are talking about, right? Many people in industry are saying, that autonomous cars are going to replace human drivers within some time frame. People have all kinds of different time frames. Some people say 5 years, some people say 20 years, some people say longer. Not thinking maybe about the sort of short-term timeline. Do you think that autonomous driving could replace all human driving at some point in the future?
I think it's going to depend on people. I think we need to some extent allow people to make those decisions. I do think there would be a benefit, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but to have autonomous only lanes, autonomous only highways, where the congestion would be significantly reduced, one would expect, because the vehicles ideally could orchestrate together and be a much more effective transportation route. At the same time, I know a lot of people really enjoy driving, and there need to be ways that they can be able to enjoy that aspect, at least within reason. We need to figure out what that is, and I do think that the majority of transportation might turn into autonomous at some point. The other aspect, though, is job security. Bus drivers, people who are doing those kinds of operations. We need to plan if those jobs are to be replaced. How are we going to help them as a community, as a society, to get their next position and manage that as well? And the same with manufacturing and all types of industries where robotics is potentially taking jobs. It's good in some ways that we're keeping people safer. Those jobs are dull, dirty, dangerous, et cetera. But where do we decide or support those people after that point? But I do, again, it will be safer, I think, but it will be 10 to 20 years probably.
Yeah, those are good comments. One thing that is kind of interesting to me is this question of this very trajectory. Like a lot of the stuff that we do in my lab right now assumes the simultaneous presence of human-driven and autonomous cars on the road, where we're trying to figure out what the human drivers might do. And that's, probably overall, that's a more potentially dangerous situation than when you have all autonomous cars, as long as the technology has been developed to a certain point and you're able to take advantage of and count on vehicle-to-vehicle communications and that kind of thing. So I think we're inevitably in a situation, because I don't think I agree with Carol that we'll probably have these autonomous corridors and that kind of thing, but I think we'll also have some autonomous cars on the road along with human-driven cars for some period of time. And therefore, the problems that we're working on in my lab, at least for some time, will need to continue to be of concern. But when we get to that, or if we get to that ultimate situation of having all the cars being driven autonomously, we should be able to reap some benefits. I haven't thought deeply about all of them, but one of them might be, one of them certainly that's intended would be, we could get rid of traffic signals and therefore significantly increase throughput in urban areas and things like that. And there are many others that we could talk about too.
That actually brings up a really interesting point here, which is that in thinking about autonomous vehicle development, many people focus on the vehicles themselves. They focus on the technology that's going into actually making the cars drive on their own. However, John, you've been mentioning a lot about other types of systems that are working in unison with that. So vehicle to vehicle communication, vehicle to infrastructure. I'm curious about thoughts that you both might have on what changes we may need to see in things like urban planning, infrastructure to actually support and really maybe move forward autonomous vehicle development, potentially faster or in a way that's just more robust than if the cars are doing everything on their own.
Yeah, well, I'll mention a couple of quick things. I don't really have a sort of comprehensive answer, but I mentioned the ability to get rid of traffic lights, for example, which a lot of people are doing work on, and it seems plausible once you have all of the cars autonomous, because you can have this radio communication. Maybe it'd be based on a particular technology that's pretty popular right now, DSRC, and it communicates around corners, so you don't have to worry about wondering whether a car is coming on the road perpendicular to yours. And that leads to some things that are kind of interesting too, that I don't pretend to be deeply schooled on, but if you're an architect or a city planner and trying to figure out how you're going to make the roads, then you might, because you can have this higher throughput, you might be able to make the roads have fewer lanes, or somehow reduce the amount of size that the traffic arteries take up within a city. The one trick about that one is there's a kind of countervailing tendency between the mixed traffic situation I discussed before, where you have both human driven and autonomous cars, because there you probably want to keep the lines of sight open and make sure that you can, even that the autonomous cars can see other human driven cars in plenty of time to avoid them and that sort of thing. Whereas the full autonomy tends in the other direction, I think. But some other interesting things would be in this Internet of Things environment that we're in, being able to take advantage of people whose cell phone might be using their cell phones while they're walking across the street, not paying attention. You might be able to actually recognize that level of distraction, and probably many other things like that I've not thought of. I'll turn it over to you, Carol.
Yeah. I just building, within cities, there could be all types of communications between vehicles, between buildings, helping, maybe even warning that, hey, traffic's bad, they're going to be late, those sorts of things. But people need to have control as well over that experience. And so figuring out what that balance is. I do think that the potential as well for that, as you mentioned, like more space, more human space, those, if it's a vehicle that a human doesn't need to drive, it doesn't necessarily matter as much what that road is. Is the road underground? Is the road, in another maybe less desirable road, but giving more green space to people, giving more walking spaces to people, better environments for humans to move around as well.
Yeah, another idea on that one, of course, is that many people have been looking at is reducing the number of parking garages that you need, because you might be able to basically move them outside the main city downtown area and then have the car autonomously go back and forth between the places that they're parking.
Yeah.
In that regard, actually, Carol, I was wondering if maybe, this idea that autonomous vehicles could potentially also reshape or be a component of reshaping urban space. I'm also wondering, do you have thoughts about what type of, interactions are people going to be having with these vehicles? You presented a potential option here where it's like, wait, we don't even see the cars, right? They're underground. But I'm curious if, maybe barring that kind of solution, do you have thoughts on sort of the other interactions that people might have when they're not in the vehicles, so as pedestrians?
Yeah, certainly. So thinking about people coming to a four-way stop sign, humans need to cross the street, just determining, how do I know that vehicle sees me? With a human driving, the human sometimes uses their hand, or there's some sort of eye contact. sometimes we misunderstand, but usually that there's some understanding between the driver and the pedestrian. But how do we convey that? People have looked at using lights and other types of ways to communicate, but we need to figure out how to keep that as clear as possible. And another thing I was thinking about when you were talking was the idea of car sharing. My car just sits because I'm working from home. And so I have a friend who borrows it once in a while. And if they're autonomous vehicles that we can just, schedule and they just show up. They're already existing car sharing programs, but it's even easier if it actually comes to me instead of me chasing it down, going a couple blocks to pick up the car. Instead, it comes to me. And what might that be like to be able to always have the car I want available, but not having to worry about having a garage. In Pittsburgh, most people don't have garages, so.
John, I'm curious, if you have any thoughts there, especially given the work that you've been doing, in looking at the interactions that, say, human-driven vehicles. Have you also been looking at how pedestrians might interact with autonomous vehicles and how that may change the way in which autonomous vehicles are going to behave?
Yeah, my lab and my students haven't really been looking at that so much, but there is work that's going on in the Robotics Institute, for example, on again, using sort of machine learning, artificial intelligence techniques to predict how people are going to move, and both when they're moving individually, which actually can be fairly unpredictable because humans have low momentum, right? Not like a car, so you can suddenly make a direction change at a corner and surprise bystanders, but then also in groups. And even not just for autonomous driving, but some of the work is applicable, like social dynamics when people are gathered in groups, what sorts of distances do they keep with one another? How can we judge from looking at them that one person is actually in conversation with a X number of other people versus another group that might be nearby? So some of that is applicable, I think, to what happens in these complex pedestrian situations in places like New York City when people are crossing streets and that kind of thing.
So this actually leads me, I think, into kind of the next part of the discussion, which is in looking forward, where are some of the areas where there needs to be sort of more innovation, more research? Like what are areas we don't have a lot of good answers to? And this could be on the technology side, this could be on human machine interaction. I'm curious to know, like in the next sort of decade, where is a fruitful research area that hopefully will make a good positive step in actually realizing a vision of having more autonomous vehicles on the road?
I can take a couple quickly. One of them we've already touched on, and I'll take that second. But the first one would be perception in general, and I'll just give some specific examples. Of course, a lot of advances have been made. If you go back to let's say the 70s, the 80s for computer vision, you were just segmenting out different objects in a particular scene, and then maybe you'd be able to say that it was separate from the rest of the scene, a book, a cup, or whatever else. In recent times, in particular with some of the machine learning and deep learning techniques, there's been a lot of progress towards scene understanding in a way that's more comparable to that in which humans are capable of doing it. But there's still lots to be done in terms of reasoning about a scene that we see. I guess one way to think about this that is instructive, I think, is that if we pick up a rental car, let's say we travel to Shanghai and we pick up a rental car and we have to go somewhere, it's nice to have a map, and of course it's great to have GPS nowadays, but as humans, we're able to just kind of meander through a city. We recognize places where we need to turn, and we can figure a lot of things out from the semantics of the situation, the way things are laid out. Whereas currently autonomous cars really depend on a very specific and detailed map in order to do what they're doing. I'm not saying we should throw that out, but it would be a sort of advanced capability would be for an autonomous car to deal with an environment in which it doesn't have a map and still to be able to do well. And we're not there. But this kind of perception I'm talking about that does scene interpretation, scene understanding, will be a big advance in that direction. Another thing that is kind of related is this whole question of LiDAR, laser sensors, which Elon Musk and Tesla have sworn off very explicitly. And so there's a question of whether or not there's a technology race right now in order to make LiDAR cheaper. And if that's successful, that'd be a game changer, and it looks like there are some companies that are doing quite well in that area. And then there are others who are trying to do without LiDAR and see if that is possible. So that's one big area of perception. I think there'll be continuing developments in that area. The second one is the safety that we talked about already. And I alluded to a couple of the approaches that have been taken to that. But if some of these, well, one thing I didn't mention, it's a little bit different from the formal verification, is control methods that use machine learning in order to create what are called safety indexes or control barrier functions, which are a certain method of ensuring safety under certain conditions. So these are relatively recent techniques that are being combined with machine learning techniques that may be able to increase the safety and sort of the provable safety, or at least the mathematically justifiable safety of cars in the future. I think a lot of work will continue to be done over the coming years in that area.
Yeah. And building on that, I think that that human-machine communication is going to be key in the near term, particularly while we have these assistive compilations of assistive systems in these vehicles. How do we communicate what the current situation is to the humans involved? How do we help people understand the limitations of the vehicles and where the end points are of what it can do and what can potentially be a hazardous situation, and really working to help improve that communication piece. And then once these vehicles are fully autonomous, which again will be a while, how do we then communicate with the human? So for example, if I have set, the vehicle is going to take me to my office in the morning, and oh, I forgot my glasses. How do I communicate to the vehicle? Stop, go around the block, go back. I need to get that. Then we'll commence with a cab driver, with an Uber, with whatever. You can do that right now. How do you do those kinds of strange alternative types of communications with these vehicles? So there's lots of work between the humans and the machines that we need to figure out.
This actually, there's a question from the audience here that I think fits well with this regarding the fact that many autonomous vehicles don't have a great sort of understanding of their surroundings or an understanding of people. The question is would developing a general AI that understands human nuances move autonomous driving forward? And I think one other aspect of this, or to just add a little bit there, is that how have you both seen kind of the developments in AI? John, you had mentioned sort of the deep learning revolution, but I'm curious about both your thoughts in this regard of understanding the nuances of people, understanding the nuances of scenes, and maybe some of the advancements in artificial intelligence that might help move that forward.
Yeah, I think the way that I would briefly characterize it is that even though there have been a lot of advances with deep learning in terms of improving prediction algorithms and various other things, we're still very far from the so-called general intelligence, right, that people have been talking about since the 50s establishing. So we have a lot of components, and none of the components in itself has anything close to what a human being can do in new situations in terms of flexibility. And there are also architectural issues with putting all the components together. This shows up even in the assistive driving things that Carol just mentioned, the ADAS, advanced driver assistance systems. If you put together a lane keeping, let's say you put together, any two of them. I mean, you can think of some situations where they conflict with one another, but they're not designed to work with one another in any event, let's put it that way. And so, on the other hand, the autonomous driving companies are trying to put everything together, but we don't have anything comparable to the way that a human sees an entire situation. There are many complex things happening, makes a unified decision, so to speak, or a decision that unifies all the complexity of the situation and deals with it. So I think there's promise, but I don't want to give the impression, I don't think anybody in AI should give the impression that we already have something close to a general intelligence. And I think I think there are really just some significant barriers to that. There are others who are much more optimistic. One of my colleagues, Hans Moravec, has been writing books about for years about how this is around the corner. And I think tremendous progress has been made, but it's still hard to imagine creating a computing system that has anything close to the aggregate capabilities of a human being.
Yeah, and building on that, I tend to be someone who is pretty skeptical about the benefit of a general intelligence system, mostly because all of a sudden we're creating another potential being. And if we do that, they're not going to want to be our slaves. That's going to create a whole nother level of problem. So there's a fine line between a system that can comprehend and understand what is around it, the system, situations, all of that, and actually being sentient, and figuring out where that line is a whole different line of research. And we need to think about the implications of even doing that. Is that really something as humans we should be doing? Is that, with all the implications that there are?
Yeah.
So I actually want to talk a little now about kind of what's happening and what's going on currently today, because I think we've been using the term, autonomous vehicles, and I think many people do imagine that as a what is called full self-driving. So the car can drive completely on its own. There's no driver intervention whatsoever. In the language of SAE levels, that would be level 5. However, I think today we actually have a spectrum of autonomous technologies that are functioning on the roads. Some of those being those advanced driver assistance systems, so ADAS, and those are lower levels of autonomy. Systems that are being purported to be more full self-driving, like from companies like Tesla. I'm actually really curious to hear your thoughts on sort of, given the fact that the technologies are making their ways into cars today, how is that going to affect sort of even just human-driven driving? Where do you see maybe some positives of these technologies coming in, and are there any potential negatives of these technologies actually being introduced potentially too early or in a way that hasn't been fully thought through? Carol, I wonder if you want to start with that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So certainly if you've bought a new car recently or rented a car recently that has lane keeping and some of these other technologies, certainly I think I have greatly benefited from the better braking systems that are available in the newer cars, instead of locking my brakes as I did in my youth. These systems can certainly keep us safer, keep us more aware of our surroundings, and support better driving for sure. The problems come in when you're sharing a vehicle, I think, and perhaps someone has deactivated one of these systems unbeknownst to you. You get in the vehicle, you are used to the vehicle doing something, much like if you think of lights, someone borrows your car and they turn the lights into a different position and now they're off and you didn't realize it. And so in some cities you can drive for quite a while before you realize your lights aren't on. These are the kinds of things where we need to make sure that the status is available to people, that they can be made aware of the situation, so that they know what is working, what is not working, and don't, as long as humans really are still responsible for the vehicle, and they will be for the near future. If they're in that operator position, or if they're not, someone is anyway responsible for the movement of that vehicle regardless. They need to also be aware of those limitations and what is supporting their work, and what is potentially has degraded for some reason, and is no longer working the way that it has in the past, and communicating those types of information, much like the tire sensors in most cars now. They warn you if the pressure is low, so that you're aware. Like, those types of indicators are really going to be much more important with these systems, depending on the urgency.
Yeah. I just have one follow-on related to Tesla. It's related to what Carol said. So I think if we look at the different Tesla accidents that have occurred, what typically happens is that Tesla says, well, we told people that they needed to have their hands on the wheel all the time. They needed to pay attention. They needed to recognize what the vehicle could do, just like Carol was saying. And it's true, that's part of what they say. But I think one thing that's missed there, and that Tesla hasn't really faced up to in any of the public statements that I've seen, is that if a car works 90% of the time in maybe it's benign situations, typically on sunny California highways, then you start to induce a psychological expectation that it's going to work for the other 10% of the time. And of course, you shouldn't do absurd things like apparently these two folks did that got into the back seat of a Tesla and let it drive by itself and unfortunately were killed. But it's understandable that it would lead to certain psychological responses. And I think that's maybe, I'm sure some people have talked about this, maybe commentators, but I think it's a little bit too glib for Tesla just to say, well, we told you shouldn't do that. There needs to be some additional things happening there. I'm not sure what they need to be. I mean, an extreme thing would be to just pull back and not provide as much autonomous capability as Tesla is until the public is ready to handle it properly. But I don't know what the best way to deal with it is. I just feel like it is a legitimate problem.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I think there are different models that companies have put forward. You know, Tesla seems to put forward sort of this vision of full self-driving. You know, the car really is taking over, driving on its own. Other companies have put more sort of supervisory visions. For example, I know that the Toyota Research Institute has their Guardian vision, where actually many of these technologies are actually there to kind of act as you know, true safety measures, that actually you're driving still, and that they sort of kick in to kind of keep the humans safe. And I think that there's sort of a spectrum here in regards to that. I wonder a little bit, you know, does there need to be sort of any maybe regulatory action or some type of governing body that maybe starts to get involved to help kind of guide the industry forward? I mean, I know at least here in the US, we generally allow the private industry to be innovative, move things forward. But I'm curious, as because we're in public space and this are huge systems, roadways, so many people are involved. I wonder if you might have thoughts about how does regulation play into kind of helping innovation move forward, but in a safe manner.
Yeah, I do think that some regulation is going to need to be required, mostly because the approaches so far have just been inadequate. Generally, unfortunately, that's the way that things need to be for people to do the right thing in some cases. But what that looks like and how do we manage to support innovation and continue people doing really good research and really pushing what these systems are capable of, and keeping people safe. It's a balance, and certainly not my area of expertise, but I do think that it needs to be done minimally. That the situation that John was describing, where humans naturally we want to push boundaries. We sometimes don't act the way we should. We go ahead and eat that sandwich while we're driving, even without the self-driving aspect. So with self-driving, what are we going to be doing? We're going to be watching that movie. We're going to be reading a book. We're going to be doing whatever it is we want to do, because we've got that sense of safety. But that's not a safe situation, because that system could turn off or immediately need your attention, and you can't put that book down that quickly. To be able to do that. So it's really going to be interesting to figure out how do we help people use these systems in a better way, and how do we make the people manufacturing these systems ensure that that's the case. And some of this is from eye tracking, that there are all kinds of systems that could be used, but then there's also the privacy questions. How do we maintain people's privacy? Where does that data go? What information is shared with whom? Particularly if I'm having passengers in my car who don't realize we're being monitored. There are a lot of questions in there. There certainly is technology available to make this work, but how do we balance those all the complexities?
Yeah, I think one thing that folks may be aware of to some extent that has been happening in recent years is that there's been some good work both by the Department of Transportation and then also by engineering organizations in order to create some safety standards. So the Department of Transportation has come out with, I think, 3 different documents. They had a vision for safety 2.0, and then they had a follow-on to that. And I've read through them. I think they're good. They don't purport to be directive. They're not saying you must do this. Maybe they have a few things that they say people have to do, but it's mainly, these are good practices, please follow them. So they're trying to avoid quashing creativity, I guess, like you were alluding to, Nick. And then at the same time, there've been, well, there's an older standard, ISO 26262, not super old, but then there's a more recent one. Now I have the numbers wrong. Is it UL 4600 or 6400? I always get mixed up, but it's meant to create, it's meant to encourage autonomous car creators to create a safety case for what they're producing and what they're fielding. So again, I think it's good, it's strong. Actually, one of my colleagues, Professor Phil Koopman in the ECE department is one of the leaders in this area, and Mike Wagner, they're both at EdgeCase Research. So I think it's a good initiative, but it's not at the point, I'm not sure you can be at the point of saying, you need to do steps 1 through 10 and meet these quantitative guidelines in order to put your car on the road. That's a little bit harder to do, I guess, partly because what we alluded to before, that there's so many different things that could happen, that could be a seemingly infinite test environment or test bed that you need to fulfill.
So in kind of building on, this topic of sort of regulation and maybe sort of these, larger systems that might need to be put in place. We do have some questions from the audience, and we also wanted to discuss this as well, was around sort of maybe the larger sort of ethical implications of autonomous vehicles. And I think that there are different aspects of ethics to consider here. Some in regards to, all of course in regards to people, but some in regards to, say, ethical actions that happen for the passengers of those vehicles, for pedestrians, for other cars, but also for even the larger systems involved, say, for example, like the environment, things like there. I'm curious about any thoughts that you both have in regards to kind of the ethics of autonomous vehicles.
Carol, I'll let you start, because I know you've thought about that.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm very, very interested in. And yeah, the initial aspects about building these systems, how do we build them in ways that support human values, that really are good, good vehicles in all the sense of that word, and that they are behaving in ways that we believe are right, given the culture that we're in, given the community, the situation, and that has to be baked in to the system in an early stage. So that's a lot of that work really has to be thought about very early. There are discussions of the trolley problem. You may have seen the MIT Morality Project, where you can actually test out like different variations on incidents and how to make a choice between, not to be too graphic, but between hitting the babies and dogs or hitting the nuns. And these really aren't appropriate discussions with regard to self-driving, because at that point it's too late. If there's really an urgent emergent situation, the vehicle ideally should stop. And, as anyone who's been in an incident probably knows, at that point, you're not making ethical decisions. You're desperately trying to gain control of the situation and to avoid risk to yourself as well as everyone else. It's not an ethical choice at that point. So that work really needs to be done very early on. And then as for dealing with other vehicles, with humans in general, I mean, it's going to always be very subjective. Was the person behind the wheel paying attention? Were they in control? Were they doing the right thing? And sometimes, no matter what, accidents happen, crashes happen. But we need to have those the ideas in place of how to deal with these situations early. And right now it is the operator. The operator is the person who is responsible. They are the ones who need to maintain control, and they are responsible if something happens with that vehicle. In the incident in Texas this past week, I don't know which human, and it unfortunately it doesn't matter at this point, but that type of situation, we're going to have to figure out what do you do when no one is in that vehicle's position, but someone is responsible and should have been responsible. And that's difficult. The other situations to think about, if something is actually wrong with the vehicle, as we saw with Boeing planes, in the past, there actually was a situation where the humans didn't have the knowledge or the awareness of how to actually fix the problem. And that could certainly be happening with some of these vehicles as well. And how do you manage that situation, the liability, as well as just, is that even a way to design anything? We need to make sure that the humans can maintain control, can take over if necessary at all times. I think that's the most important part of the ethics is making sure that humans are able to maintain control for as long as these vehicles aren't truly autonomous.
Yeah, I think Carol did a great job of covering that aspect of it. I guess maybe one other aspect of the ethics that we touched on earlier, and that she had also mentioned, has to do with employment or loss of employment from the deployment of autonomous vehicles. I just wanted to throw one thing out on that. There are two basic schools of thought, it seems like. One would be that this is no different from other economic revolutions. It's going to happen fairly gradually, or at least gradually enough that there will be opportunities for people to be retrained and find other employment. Many times in the past this has happened. We don't have buggy whip manufacturers anymore. The other school of thought would be this is going to be unique. This is going to be the fastest such revolution in history, and that therefore could have devastating consequences, and we need to be specially prepared for it. And I'm not sure which of those is true. From a technological standpoint, I think it's happening more slowly than we expected and we were saying 5 years ago. But I don't think we've always been good in any event at retraining people or offering those kinds of opportunities. So there are always these questions of, to what extent should the government be involved? To what extent should companies be foreseeing what's going to happen and providing opportunities for their employees to be ready for the future? And those are important questions that I don't think can be governed entirely by individual companies' bottom lines. They are a societal responsibility.
So I know that we've been, as part of this, we're thinking a little bit about, some of the things that could potentially, go wrong. And I guess there's maybe, I think it's actually a healthy thing to think about the potential downsides of new technology, such that we can start to mitigate some of those issues that might arise. I wonder now, I want to maybe just as our final, before we switch completely into our questions from the audience, maybe and ending on a somewhat of a positive note for our question period is, assuming that we really do achieve autonomous vehicles sometime in the future, what is the most positive aspect of this sort of revolution that you see? And it could be in any part. It could be for people. It could be for the way that we do travel. It could be the way that we actually spend our time in vehicles. I'm just curious, what are some of the more kind of positive, or the most positive thing that you're excited about in regards to autonomous driving?
Well, the two that immediately come to my mind, and there's nothing revolutionary about them. I think you touched on at least one, maybe both there. But one would be, we know that over 1 million people a year are killed worldwide in automobile crashes. It's 37 to 40,000 a year in the United States. And reducing that would be a wonderful blessing, right? So that's important. And then the other one you mentioned there, I think we do spend a lot of time. On the one hand, Americans and Germans are notorious for loving to drive. But on the other hand, it would be nice to recover some of that time. I love to read and do other things. So travel time, like I don't mind flying to China for 15 hours because I can catch up on some reading, right? So if we can do that in our cars or whatever else we want to do, I think that's a great benefit. And there are many others, but those are the two that immediately leapt to my mind.
Carol?
Oh, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. My cats are trying to participate. So yeah, so I think that some of the other benefits might be just car sharing, easier abilities to get where you need to go. So an example, I was working with an individual who had poor vision, and he regularly with his wife would go to a different state to teach a course. She would go anyway. And one of the issues was she could get there. She could get an Uber to take her, or, you know, whatever vehicle. So she could get someone to take her to that school that she was teaching, but she couldn't get somebody to bring her back to Pittsburgh. And so those kinds of trips, my parents live in West Virginia, and there's not a lot of transportation between here and the city they live in. If I could order an autonomous vehicle to pick them up, and it could wait outside until they were ready and nobody's complaining, and then bring them to me, and then when it's time, take them back home. I mean, it opens up dramatic potential for transportation to places that typically are very difficult for people to be able to get transportation from. So I'm really looking forward to that ability as well. No more bored, annoyed drivers waiting and then leaving you in the middle of nowhere because they just couldn't wait anymore. So I think that will make everybody happy.
Actually, it's interesting that you mentioned, you know, those who may have disabilities, that autonomous vehicles could allow them to travel independently. I know, John, you had mentioned that before. I'll say personally, so my research is actually looking into this. I'm leading a project looking at how those who are disabled, who have sensory mobility or cognitive disability would be able to actually communicate and control and basically take independent rides in autonomous vehicles. I'm personally very excited about that. And that actually comes up, a question from the audience here is, you know, do we really think that this type of smart commuting can help disabled people? And maybe a question there is, what would it take and for those who have disabilities or who have low mobility to actually trust these vehicles? Because it's slightly different in some regards from maybe those who can drive today learning to trust an autonomous vehicle versus those who rely on other forms of transportation or other people to actually learn to maybe independently trust this. Curious about any thoughts there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very personal. But some of the people I've spoken with are actually very excited to not have to talk to a human, to not have to explain things to someone else, and to be able to have the freedom. If they want to go to the bar at 2 a.m., they go to the bar at 2 a.m. and no one's judging, you know, why is this person going to do this thing? And that is a sense of freedom that many people have never had in their lives. They've always been reliant on other people to transport them and to get them where they need to go. So the freedom and the independence that it offers is incredible. How someone who has low vision, you know, finds that vehicle. Thankfully, we are every day improving cell phones and techniques to be able to really localize on things. So we're getting there. I don't think that will be such an issue, but individually, different people have different levels of trust anyway. So it's going to be probably a small group initially, and then as things, you know, as people have better stories to tell and good experiences, hopefully it will grow and expand in use.
Yeah, I agree with Carol. I think to me, there are two basic lines of evidence, right? One is personal experience. If you have been able to drive in the car and it seems safe and you've done it multiple times, and probably one hopes in more benign situations at first. That's one of the reasons that a lot of the planned or actual deployments are maybe local shuttles or things that aren't going to face as difficult traffic environments. So there's the personal experience, and that's really the way to build trust. And then for the other line of evidence would be statistical. You know, we want to be able, and this is kind of difficult to do. I think some of the claims that Tesla has made based on their X number of miles of safe driving have not really been compelling. There have been some criticism made of them. But if we could say plausibly, the way we do about air travel, that there's a certain accident rate for autonomous cars and it's much lower than human driving, then that's a piece of evidence that may not be appealing to some, but for certain mindsets, that's fairly comforting and might induce them to be more ready to use those means of transportation.
You know, another question that I have here is in regards to sort of that personal experience. Have both of you actually ridden in any form of sort of autonomous, vehicle? I know I have. I'm actually be really interested to hear maybe some of your own experiences. Like, what was it like the first time that you were in a vehicle that you weren't driving yourself?
Yeah, and my experience is mostly limited to the Uber ATG's vehicles, but it was surprisingly comfortable and smooth, and certainly limited, but it's still really a positive experience overall. I also got to take some training behind the wheel as the operator, taking over in modeled emergent situations on a track, and that was really interesting to see the limits, to understand for myself what it took. These are relatively large Volvos, so they're heavy vehicles to begin with, and being able to integrate with that system, to team with that system, I should say, was really really interesting to understand the limitations from that point of view.
Yeah, and for me, I've been in all the cars that we developed at CMU, the Boss vehicle that we developed for the race, and that one was kind of interesting because, as I just said, it was developed for a race. So if you spent a lot of time in there, you either had to develop an iron stomach or you were going to get sick because it was high acceleration and deceleration. So that was, designed for a specific purpose. But then a later Cadillac that we retrofitted, spent a lot of time in that. I also been in the Waymo and the Argo vehicles. And I think, yeah, my experience is similar to Carol's. Generally, it works well. Of course, there's still situations where the safety driver needs to intervene, and those are, we talked about them already. Some, the fact that we just can't deal with every situation, and it's not even only the so-called long tail, really unusual situations. It's things that come up in everyday driving still, and the companies are trying to reduce the frequency of that's needed of such interventions. But that takes time, and it's going in that incremental way that we've talked about.
Yeah, it's interesting that, both of you kind of mentioned how, you've been in it. Johnny, I think the having the iron stomach. So my experience in, so I've driven Teslas, and arguably those are a low level of self-driving, although, you can take your hands off the wheel and let it drive. And I remember sitting there being, I guess I wouldn't call it a white knuckle in the sense of like holding onto the wheel, because I wasn't, but it was definitely a little bit nerve-wracking. Although it was interesting that over time you would start to relax and you'd start to get comfortable. One of the things I do wonder here is that there's so much excitement around the technology, and I think there's a lot of real potential here for changes in safety, but that in some ways the actual experience that people may have eventually will be quite unremarkable. Although this has been the trend in sort of, I think, major advancements in computing, is that, something like our mobile phones, it was amazing that we could put so much power and computing into, a handheld device. And now today it's almost unremarkable. What the capabilities that we have, even, 15 years later. And I do wonder if things may move in that direction, where eventually things will become sort of, it becomes an unremarkable technology. And that may be the goal in some ways.
Yeah, and many of the studies I did, I saw that happening with people dramatically quickly, where they would just be like, it's cool. And very, very quickly adapting, because humans do. We adapt very, very quickly. And an interesting point you brought up was motion sickness, and that's going to be a big issue. I think women and interestingly Asians tend to have the highest levels of motion sickness, and it's something that subsides with age, and children, of course. But it's going to be a significant factor as well. Is how do we minimize that motion so that not only obviously these vehicles we expect will move in ways that hopefully don't make everyone ill, but but also make sure that there's adequate windows, make sure that there's adequate ventilation, that sort of thing, to keep most people comfortable.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll say, I think that's a really interesting point. Some of the work that I did a few years ago, we were looking at basically the adaptive cruise control and lane keeping, and then thinking about, what is actually perceptually smooth or comfortable for humans. And actually, I was working with some control engineers at Renault Nissan, and I sort of built some remote observation systems, because they were working on, okay, well, we can mathematically define this is how quickly it should brake, how smoothly it should brake, how it should accelerate, but then what does it actually feel like for that person in the vehicle? And I'm personally really excited about kind of future research and sort of understanding that those human factor sides of things, and merging that really with the technical kind of controls work to say, okay, well, this is how we can define sort of how the vehicle dynamics are sort of operating, but that we know and have sort of a model of like what is going to be comfortable for our passengers. And that could be, individual. There's definitely people who are more or less susceptible. There's also the element of sort of what is the experience of driving. I mean, for example, many of the autonomous vehicle development work has also been kind of in parallel and is starting to maybe merge with electric vehicle development. Of course, Teslas are electric vehicles. Being an electric vehicle is kind of amazing. It's like the dynamics that you can have, the accelerations, the forces, it's fun. It actually can be quite a fun experience, or it could be an amazingly smooth and quiet experience. So I'm really excited about that. John, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, especially on the technical side, right? How are people kind of thinking about kind of those control systems in regards to, say, the human factors of like what is perceptually kind of comfortable?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, to my knowledge, there hasn't been a great deal of collaborative research between, let's say, control theorists and human machine interaction experts. However, I'm sure there's some exceptions, but I just don't know of any off the top of my head. However, there's no doubt that the typical motion planner is going to optimize on the basis of an objective function. And the objective function is going to, I'd say, inevitably include terms that involve accelerations, both lateral and longitudinal. And then usually what we do is we look up something from, I don't know, OSHA or whoever publishes the standards about what the maximum such accelerations might be. And we might go one derivative further and be minimizing jerk, not just acceleration. So those things all go into the objective function, but I think it's without a great deal of expertise from the human factor side, where I think probably there could be fruitful collaborations that would make that more sophisticated and better along the lines of what you were just describing.
So we have some more questions coming in from the audience, and I'd like to remind our audience, please feel free to use the question and answer feature. There's a question here around, we had talked earlier about maybe there'd be lanes for autonomous driving, like maybe like biking lanes. And I wonder if in thinking about kind of the way that our roads are set up today and how roads could basically be done in the future, do we see this as something as kind of incremental? We'll start to see certain lanes. Will those lanes need to be augmented with anything? Or do we imagine that there may be new sort of infrastructure development for this? And Carol, you had mentioned at some point, maybe we'll start, putting roads underground. Of course, that is, a reality that, Elon Musk is also planning on. I'm curious though, in regards to sort of separate lanes versus working on the roads that we have now, what would it take to get there? And is that going to be kind of an efficient path forward?
Yeah, I mean, the maintenance that's currently required in our cities is such a significant portion of the expenses for any city. Realistically, I don't see that happening. However, there are new cities being built, I believe in China and Russia, I could be wrong, but where they're specifically building them with the expectation of autonomous vehicle movement in certain sections and that sort of thing. And so that seems to be probably a more realistic model than retrofitting our cities with even more lanes. You know, it's gonna depend how quickly this technology really does come to fruition. The high occupancy lanes that are currently in our cities potentially could be converted to being for self-driving vehicles. I could see that being one way to manage it if the benefits are there, and that the cities see that is a way to go, because that effectively would be a very similar use. Ideally, there would be high occupancy in those vehicles as well, but you know, just figuring out how to do that is tough, though. Yeah.
Yeah, a quick bit on the history. The Berkeley Path project back in the 90s actually depended on infrastructure changes and had magnetic objects in the road in order to be able to help with lane following. And although that was a successful project overall and there's continuing research on it, I think the basic verdict was that trying to change infrastructure in the US anyway, as Carol was alluding to, is too expensive and we need to do it a different way. Of course, doing it the different way leads to all kinds of technological problems, which we're facing now as we're trying to make this a reality. But I'll just cite one of them. So if we were to use the HOV lanes, which makes sense, or something like that on the highway, then one thing we want to make sure is that we, particularly in places like Arizona where the sun tends to fade the lane markings, that we have some way, maybe through a better technology, better paint, whatever, of making a very clear marker that delineates the lane. Then we don't have to constantly be repairing that or refreshing it for the autonomous car to be able to use.
Another question from the audience, and this is quite interesting, around kind of the economics of autonomous vehicles. And I'll say that you know, this is probably a pretty speculative area, but you know, I think it's fair to engage with. Is one question here is, do we think that autonomous vehicles may enlarge the gap between the wealthy and the poor? Or that access to such technology is going to be quite, you know, split among those with sort of financial means and those that don't. At the same time, I'll add on to this a little bit, though, that there have been other visions that this could actually improve equity in regards to transportation access. As we talked about earlier, say for those who are disabled, right now, they rely on only certain numbers of systems. This can actually limit, you know, their ability to say work in certain areas that autonomous vehicles might allow them to actually have more freedom, and that could ultimately provide more financial freedom. I'm curious about maybe thoughts that you both have in regards to sort of the nature of the economics for individuals of autonomous vehicles.
I'll be glad to go first on this one. I just have some brief remarks. I think for personal cars, for personal vehicles, it will be the case that wealthier people will be able to get access to it more quickly. We know that from Tesla cars, right? They're more expensive than average cars, and they have the autopilot on them. But I would say that personal cars are not necessarily the best business plan for introducing autonomous technology. I don't think that because of the expense involved, it's going to have to be gradually introduced there. And I don't know that. Well, there's some advantages to it, as we've talked about, but it's perhaps not as important as the ride sharing that Carol had talked about, or the long range trucking. And if we look at the ride sharing, then I think, as you were just saying, Nick, that should be open to all, right? Uber's model is to drive those prices down to be pretty low. So I think there's not a single answer, right? It depends on the segment of the market that we're talking about.
Yeah, I totally agree. The choices that we make as a society are going to determine that, but certainly more expensive vehicles clearly are not going to be available to everyone. But I think that we can make huge progress in making equitable transportation a reality with the autonomous vehicles.
All right. Well, we're actually at time. I think that was a nice way to end the discussion. I want to thank John and Carol for all of your thoughts, for engaging in the questions that I had, also the questions that our audience had. I'd like to also thank our audience for asking such great questions. I think everyone here is really thinking deeply about what the future might bring with sort of the autonomous vehicle revolution. I'm excited to see where things go. I'm excited personally to see research and development in this area, and eventually see more vehicles on the road, such that we can achieve some of these kind of aspirational goals of equitable transportation, safer transportation, and sort of better roadways. So I think with that, we'll end. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing what happens in the future.
Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for all the speakers in this panel. So we will have a 10-minute break from now, and we will restart our next lecture series at 10:30. Thank you.
Bilateral student organization with the goal of connecting scholars and startups with leading expertise. We feature high-profile forum, venture competition, and career fairs that gathers different parties to address real-world challenges. We've connected 7,000 plus audiences, involved 800 plus startup projects, reached out to 500 plus industry leaders, and presented ourselves on 100 plus media outlets worldwide over the past decade. In April 2012, we hosted the first CMU Summit and the first New Venture Competition with CMU CASB and CMU CSSA. 38 experts presented their insights on 5 panels. More than 600 participants from 30 cities attended the conference. In January 2018, together with CMU Silicon Valley campus, we held the first CMU Silicon Valley Artificial Intelligence Summit. This summit featured elite forums, startup demos, job fairs, and networking luncheon. In November 2018, in partnership with CMU UEA and CMU GEC, we hosted Hack a Startup Business Competition. Participants, regardless of age, major, or experiences, are welcomed. In 2019 fall, CMU Summit collaborated with CMU CPDC to introduce the Global Opportunities Fair, the biggest fair for international students in CMU. This fair had over 1,000 plus students participated, and companies such as Sony, Tata Group, and Tencent attended. CMU Summit has accomplished its first 10 years journey. During the past decade, we continuously rethink on the past and looking forward to starting our journey for the next decade coming. We are excited to present our 10th CMU Summit to you in this April.
Welcome, everyone, to the 10th CMU Summit on US-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship. The CMU Summit was founded in 2012 with the mission of building a bilateral bridge for communications and collaborations between the US and China in fields of innovation and entrepreneurship, supporting innovators and entrepreneurs from both countries and facilitating technological and business development. Over the past decade, the CMU Summit has grown to become one of the most prominent innovation-centered summits held by a student organization in North America. Our summit and New Venture Competition have attracted over 7,000 audience, 800 startup projects, 500 industry leaders, and are covered by over 100 media outlets worldwide. We are now a CMU recognized student organization based at Swart Center for Entrepreneurship. We have over 60 active members ranging from freshmen to PhD students from all 7 colleges at CMU. Our 5 departments include conference, competition, external, marketing, and finance. Due to the ongoing pandemic, we have moved the 10th CMU Summit online. This year, at the start of a new decade, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of our CMU Summit. At the start of 2020s, we would also like to invite you to join us to review the past decade of technological advancement and consider possibilities for innovations in the years to come. To present you with unique perspectives and diverse views, we have invited over 40 esteemed speakers, including prominent scholars, industry leaders, esteemed venture capitalists, and promising entrepreneurs. On behalf of the 10th CMU Summit on US-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship, I would like to give special thanks to all of our speakers, partners, collaborators, and sponsors. We couldn't have gone this far without you. I would also like to thank all the participants for your interest in the 10th CMU Summit. We hope that our 10th CMU Summit will inspire you with new ideas and opportunities, and we wish you every success in your career and studies. Thank you.
The 10th CMU Summit is held from April the 23rd to 25th through online platforms. This year, over 40 guest speakers will participate in our event. In keynote speech, speakers will combine entrepreneurship, technology, and businesses to guide the pioneers of the future in the 30-minute talk. In panel discussion, professionals will cover 7 topics, including creativity in new media, smart infrastructure, smart commuting, robotics, VR and AR, online education, and biotechnology. Also, we will hold a new session lecture series where lecturers will talk about how new technologies drive the transformation of traditional industries. Besides, we provide startups with communication channels. We held new venture competitions in the past several years. In this year's summit, to adapt to this virtual event, our demo day allows entrepreneurs to showcase their businesses to investors, as we intend to provide more exposure for early startups with a wider range of audiences. During our summit, we also provide perfect opportunities to connect companies with CMU students through a career fair. Every year, companies interact with students, give their resumes, and conduct on-site interviews.
As the influence of CMU Summit continues to grow, we also collaborate with CMU's official career center, CPDC, to organize Global Opportunities Fair for international students. In this career fair, companies are willing to provide visa sponsorship within the US or job opportunities around the globe. This career fair has now become the largest international student job fair, and we have become the first student organization to collaborate with CPDC to organize such a school-wide event. Up until now, this career fair has more than 1,300 students to participate and leading position companies such as Tencent, Sony, and Tata Group to attend. On the other side, we also have collaboration with CMU Alumni Network to connect their resources to our students. We initiate an alumni interview program where outstanding alumni can share their career advice, personal experiences, and insights to fellow students. We strive to build a resource chain that unites alumni, companies, and students all together. And we believe this platform will foster collaboration when facing challenges and opportunities in the future.
Hey all, I'm Betty, the founder of the CMU Summit organization and the president of the 6th CMU Summit on US-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship. In July 2016, we transitioned from an annual event to a CMU recognized organization with the purpose to better serve our mission. It's unbelievable that it is already the 10th anniversary of the CMU Summit. Congratulations on all the achievements. I wish to express my sincere appreciation to the current executive committee, CMU Summit's alumni, partners, and all the speakers, collaborators, media, and sponsors who have supported us. Thank you for being part of our organization's success over the past 10 years. I believe we could together co-create an even more remarkable CMU Summit in the next decade. I look forward to seeing you all at the 10th anniversary.
Hello. Congratulations on the 10th anniversary of the Summit event, a student-led event on innovation and entrepreneurship. I participated a few years back. Specifically, I was happy to contribute to a conversation on fundamental research and innovation in robotics, with fantastic opportunities for scholars and students to discuss current research topics. Congratulations again.
I'm Teresa Trombetta, Assistant Vice President for Alumni and Constituent Engagement at CMU. And I'd like to thank all of the students, faculty, staff, and alumni who have come together to build this year's engaging list of speakers and panelists. We are excited to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the CMU Summit and hope that you'll join us and Tartans from around the world during this year's virtual programming.
Hello, I'm Mimi Fairman, the Executive Director of International Development here at CMU. My team works with internationally based alumni and families, helping connect them to each other and to the university. This 10th anniversary of the CMU Summit on US-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship is an incredible milestone. I would like to thank and congratulate all the students over this past decade who have contributed to this success. Over the years, the summit has provided a platform for students, alumni, parents and friends of the university interested in innovation and entrepreneurship to connect and collaborate. I also want to thank the sponsors and donors who each year make this event possible. I'm looking forward to this year's exciting virtual program and to meeting again in person with all of you in future years.
Hi, my name is Jeff Jeffries from the Career and Professional Development Center at Carnegie Mellon University. I would like to congratulate the Summit for their 10-year anniversary and to all the alumni and current students for all the success they've had over the years. And from all of us at the Career and Professional Development Center, we would like to thank you for your continued partnership, and we look forward to another great year.
CMU Summit, happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit, happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit,
Happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit.
CMU Summit, happy 10th.
happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit,
Happy 10th
anniversary.
CMU Summit. CMU Summit. Happy 10th.
CMU Summit, happy 10th. CMU Summit, happy 10th.
CMU Summit. Happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit, happy 10th.
CMU Summit, happy 10th.
Happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit.
CMU Summit.
CMU Summit, happy 10th. Happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit, happy 10th.
Happy 10th anniversary.
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 CMU Summit, happy 10th anniversary. Okay, we will start our next lecture series soon. Okay, so next we will move on to our first lecture series, Traditional Industries and Transformation and Innovation. We will explore the most cutting-edge technologies used in upgrading the heavy industry and multiple brand new high technology applications in real world. Please allow me to introduce the first lecturer, Glenn DeVries. He is the co-CEO and co-founder of Medidata, the leading cloud platform for life science. He also serves as the trustee of Carnegie Mellon University. In this lecture series, he will be talking about patient equation and the future of life science. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. And as I'm doing that, it is wonderful to be here as a CMU alum who actually has worked in his own company for over 2 decades. And Medidata, the company I founded, has offices in Shanghai and Beijing. And I do a lot of work all over Asia and a lot in China. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I've been lucky enough to see in my career and where I see the healthcare industry and the life sciences industry moving in the next few years. I am here representing myself, not my company, Medidata Solutions, which was purchased about a year ago by Dassault Systems in France. But I still work there. And so anything that's in my head that's related to our strategy should probably not be that surprising. I promised I was going to talk about healthcare quite broadly. And let me start with this. If you look at this publication from Nature Medicine from a couple months ago, it shows you a map of the world, 2 maps of the world actually, where the distance that people live from their homes to a hospital is illustrated by color. And the darker the map is, the farther away you are, either by car or by foot. And I think it's a pretty haunting picture. It shows you some of the geographical inequity that we have in terms of access to healthcare. And it shows you that actually there's a huge, not just ethical problem with that, but frankly, if you're in healthcare and you're in life sciences, there's an economic problem with that, because these are people who are being underserved, and also there's an opportunity to actually, from an industrial perspective, make them part of this better world. And actually, in the last few months, depending on where you are, in the last year and a half, we've actually had those maps of access to healthcare go dark for everybody in the world. You can't see behind me, I'm in downtown New York, which is where I live. And I can walk to 3 or 4 academic medical centers from here. It didn't matter during a COVID lockdown. We had people who were not going to the doctor all over the world, so their conditions were undiagnosed. We had people who were not actively managing their chronic conditions. It's probably getting worse there. There were people all over the world who had to pause their therapies, sometimes critical life-saving therapies, infusions, chemotherapies, things for cancer. And we are just beginning to see where this terrible assumption we had that a patient could be with a physician or a nurse practitioner in the same room at the same time in a pandemic just isn't true. And from a healthcare equity perspective, always isn't true. And so one of the things I focus on in my career, so Medidata has run, and I've been able to be involved in probably more clinical trials than anyone in the world. We connect doctors, nurses, patients, pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, everywhere together when they do their research projects. And so I've been able to watch that for a few decades and see how people think about these products. And the way I think about these products is they are tools for healthcare. Doctors, nurse practitioners, any caregiver uses tools when they treat patients. And the life sciences industry's job is to make better tools for healthcare professionals. If you make a better tool, a vaccine that didn't exist against a particular virus, in the example of COVID-19, better tool. A better cancer therapy than what's on the current market, better tool. You're a good life scientist, you're a good life sciences company. And if you don't do that, you're not. The tools come in a couple different categories. Medical devices, things that are manufactured. Molecular therapies, so this is a very broad category. This is a gross oversimplification, but there are things that are biologically interacting with things in your body. And digital therapies, apps, et cetera. And one of the things that I think was interesting before COVID-19, and it's accelerating now, is that, remember I was talking about the people who couldn't go to the doctor, couldn't or wouldn't manage their chronic conditions or couldn't get their therapies or have access to therapy because they're too far or don't want to go to or can't go to an academic medical center. The convergence of these types of products, you look at it as a kind of Venn diagram, are creating solutions to that. We're beginning to be able to use devices and software to diagnose people remotely. We're even able in cases, in the most extreme cases, to actually use a combination of device, digital therapies, and molecules to treat patients in their homes where they are. And that could be for an infusion, for a complex therapy, for something life-threatening, or even one of my favorite examples of something in the center of this Venn diagram is if you know anybody who is, or you yourself, a diabetic, there are now combination devices that include a blood glucose monitor that continually measures your blood sugar, a insulin pump, which delivers insulin into your bloodstream as necessary, and a device with a piece of software, something digital, that makes sure you're receiving the optimal insulin dose at every time during the day. That's a perfect example of the center of this. And not only do we have this convergence, but in each individual category, the molecules, the devices, the software are all getting more sophisticated on their own. And this sophistication is a good thing. We in medicine, we in healthcare, we talk about precision. Give the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. That's great for the patient. It's great for the doctor. It's great for everybody. We even can do things that are personalized, where we can take something, in this case, this is a leukemia drug. There was the first one like this from Novartis, where you take cells from blood from a patient for their immune system, you take them out of the patient's body and retrain them in a laboratory genetically, reintroduce them into the patient, and now the patient's own immune system can fight their cancer. That's not just precise, that's again personalized, just for one specific person. Now, these are all things, as I said, related to therapeutic complexity. We have to now think about a manufacturing process, not just for a device, not for a drug, but that begins in the clinic and ends in the clinic, or begins in my home and ends in my home. But the complexity is something that comes along with the positive benefit for all of these individuals. The big question is, how do we manage that? And again, I've spent the last 20 years working in the clinical research industry, doing research all over the world to help show that drugs and devices are safe and effective and valuable. But as the tools get better, we start to have new challenges in terms of how we use them and certainly how we test them. One of them is patient scarcity. So the mathematical certainty is that the more precise your therapy is, all the way down to being personalized, the fewer people in the world will benefit from it. The number of people you can give a precise therapy to, the more you define it as precise, goes down. The more you define it as precise, the more you are narrowing down the number of people who will benefit from it. That means I know more things about those people. That means I'm measuring more things about them to define that set of people. That's complicated. And not only is it complicated, but I'm now recording all this information to create this more precise definition of who's going to benefit. And I have to manage that data. Again, I work in clinical research. We deal with billions of data points from patients all around the planet. And when we think about this data, and we think about how it's going to transform the way we look at healthcare and we look at testing new products in life sciences, we see certain things that in some cases are positive and in some cases are negative. Like I said, I've been incredibly lucky. I've had the best seat in life sciences, I think, that you could possibly have in the world, working with companies of every size, everywhere. I worked with every company who developed a vaccine, not including Sputnik 5. And not including Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca studies, but BioNTech, the company that Pfizer licensed their product from, uses Medidata software. So I've got to see all this great stuff and participate in. For that, I'm very thankful. But also over the last 20 years, I've seen a lot of failures. I've seen a lot of people not successfully bring their drugs to market, not successfully have a good strategy around data and digital transformation. And I'll share with you one of the things where I think things go wrong, and then I'll tell you how great it can be when it goes right. And the way it goes wrong is people assume that if you have certain data and you put certain effort into creating benefit with that data, it's a linear relationship. And that is just absolutely not the case. You need to climb a curve where when you have certain data, you and people who work in various parts of, I think, finance, sciences, et cetera, you know this inherently, but I think it's important to visualize it. You have to standardize that data and prepare it for use with the right algorithms before you can create real benefit. And I will tell you that standardization, the data curation process, is something that the people I work with have gotten quite good at over the years. Because we found that this is where many people fail. They run out of time, they run out of money, they run out of gumption before they have their data in a state where they can actually combine it with the right techniques and analyses to do really exciting things. But when we do climb this curve, we can do incredible, exciting things. So how do we test therapies in general? We have a simple therapy, and let's use one on the market, and a simple medical equation. So I wrote a book called The Patient Equation. A lot of these concepts are in it. If you're kind enough to purchase it, I won't benefit from it. All proceeds go to Conquer Cancer, the ASCO Foundation. But I write about some of these things in the book. And one of the things in the book is that clinical trials in many cases haven't evolved in hundreds of years. This slide illustrates the way it was discovered that having citrus will actually ward off scurvy. It was done in the British Navy hundreds of years ago, and you take a bunch of people and you give them fruits, and bunch of people, and you don't give them fruits, and you put them, they're already on boats in the middle of the ocean in a very primitive time for sailing, and the ones who don't have any of this fresh fruit get more scurvy. That's how medicine and new products are evaluated today. Take a group of patients, give them the amazing new therapy, or what you hope is amazing, and give a bunch of them a sugar pill or a standard of care, the best currently available tool, right? We want to make our new tool the better tool, but the best currently available tool, and we compare them. Well, if we climb that data curve, we can start to change things significantly. It's a little bit subtle, but if you look back in the beginning of this slide, I add a whole different comparators. We're making the denominator bigger for our analyses with different kinds of data. And the ratio of people who are using standard of care, the control group, I'll show you how this works, can actually get smaller. And we can start to bring in new kinds of data from external sources as part of this expanded set of comparators. So how do we do this? Well, let me illustrate it by talking about research projects in general. In this case, clinical research, we have here an illustration of lots of clinical trials operating, let's say, in different parts of the world, maybe different therapeutic areas. Some are for cancer, some are for heart disease, and each one of them is its own little data silo. So one of the things that you can do is you can say, okay, well, I'm interested in something. Let's say I'm interested in a particular kind of cervical cancer. Let's eliminate all the studies that are not in that cervical cancer. And then let's only look at the patients who were given the control, who were given the standard of care, and put them in a data set. We now have a lot of work to do. This is non-trivial to do in a scientifically responsible way, because the data is coming from different experiments, different companies, but it can be assembled. And if we can turn it into a data set, we can then take a smaller study done in the same medical condition, the same in this, the example I gave was cervical cancer therapeutic area, and take those patients and start to line them up with historical data, data from the past, and use that as a comparator. Now, once I've got the data arranged this way, if you're familiar with any kind of research, clinical in nature, you'll probably recognize this. If not, you won't. It's a Kaplan-Meier curve. It's a survival curve, and it's showing in this case that the smaller number of patients in blue seem to actually do better than the patients in green that were from the previous studies. That's a good outcome. It may not always be that way, but this is the exact kind of picture that we would give a regulator, we would publish in the New England Journal of Medicine to show that we've created a better tool. And we can do those same kind of statistics in that much broader set of data that I was describing. And in fact, one of the things that Medidata was able to work on is doing this. And actually the cervical cancer example is a real one. We're also doing it in things like glioblastoma. It's a very difficult to treat brain cancer. And in the case of cervical cancer, there was recently a fast track designation given by the FDA to one of our clients, a company that we work with, because we were able to actually help them take a very small group of patients, use this idea of bigger control data sets from other clinical trials, and we were able to mathematically show that these statistical artifacts that you create based on these analyses are just as good using this data from broader sources as it would be if we were doing a controlled study. What does this mean? It means we can that much more rapidly show that a new drug is a better tool for healthcare. We can also expose fewer patients to something that is not as effective or potentially harmful in terms of how we get them into the clinical trial to begin with, right? So we're doing good things for a population, getting things proven faster, and we're doing better things for the individuals. Now, if you go, if you're on campus at Carnegie Mellon and you go down to the Mellon Institute and you go into the office of Dean Doerge, who is the dean of the Mellon College of Science, you'll see this gentleman's picture on the wall. His name is Thomas Bayes, and if you have taken statistics at any point in your academic career, and I hope you have, and if you haven't, you should, you will learn about two different schools of statistics, frequentist and Bayesian. And Bayesian comes from an idea from obviously this guy. And if you don't know about it, I'll try to put it extremely simply. There are certain statistical techniques where, let's say we want to know if we flip a coin, how many times it comes up heads versus tails. We decide we're going to flip it 100 times, tally all the results, and learn something at the end about the nature of coins, how many times they go heads versus tails. What Thomas Bayes did is came up with some techniques where every time we flip the coin, we can look at the result and learn something about the nature of coins. We can start to predict how the coins will flip. And when we predict it incorrectly or correctly, we use that to make a better prediction in the future. And if you go back to my line of different techniques that we can use in healthcare and in research, when we're more disciplined about data, that's related to a kind of clinical trial, which we're going to see more and more around the world. I was lucky enough in my life to have a mentor, Don Berry, who is one of the foremost minds in this kind of Bayesian adaptive study, where we dynamically continue to compare not just the standard of care with a new drug, but we take the standard of care and we compare it to multiple new drugs at the same time for different patients. And we can categorize patients. So maybe I volunteer for this study. How did the people who were like me clinically, people who had a very similar disease state, maybe very similar genetics, do with drug A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and preferentially give me a drug, randomize me, but put me in a weighted randomization towards something that is likely to benefit me. Even fewer people will be exposed to something that is harmful or not effective. And we will more quickly create not just a better individual outcome, but a population outcome where we really understand how to practice medicine better. And I'll give you a real world example of how some of these things can be used. This was a wonderful privilege to work on this with a patient advocacy and research organization run by a physician scientist who actually has the condition. It's a rare disease called Castleman disease. And it's an autoimmune condition. There's a drug for people who are interested in biology and medicine. It's siltuximab. It's an interleukin-6 inhibitor. And it takes this disease, which your immune system goes crazy and starts to fight your own body and suppresses your immune system. And this drug worked for about 1 out of every 5 patients with this rare disease. Maybe 5,000 people are diagnosed with this disease a year. Well, we were able to take data from multiple clinical trials, combine it into one data set, and add some proteomic data, add data from tissue samples from the patients in these different studies. And we're able to go from having a 1 out of 5 chance for any given patient to benefit from this drug, to having a 65% chance, so a more than 3 out of 5 chance that we could associate the right patient with this treatment, siltuximab, at the right time. That is precision medicine. And we did it with an on-market drug. We did it with patients from existing research projects. And we were able to, once again, help those people. Now, if you're thinking mathematically, you said, well, okay, but Glenn, how about those other patients who aren't benefiting from the fact that people who will benefit from this particular drug? Well, the other nice thing about doing research this way, about thinking about medicine this way, is as you're learning, you are taking the research process that is usually a hypothesis confirmation process, and frankly, oftentimes a hypothesis confirmation process alone. We have our drug, we design a protocol based on the null hypothesis that it doesn't work, and we prove it works, or we show that it doesn't work. Well, with these learning types of studies and this kind of research, we actually can be in a hypothesis generation mode at the same time as we're confirming. And I won't go through the details in our limited time, but we actually were able to find different avenues of research for the other patients who didn't benefit from this drug. And overall, if you get excited about this new way of using data in life sciences and healthcare, Jerry Lee, a friend of mine who used to be in the Cancer Moonshot, then moved on to USC, put this idea in my head. And you know, I think of Carnegie Mellon as an amazing multidisciplinary institution. I'm a trustee actually, and I love the university desperately. And Jerry, this is an example of how multidisciplinary stuff is so important. Jerry is a chemical engineer by training. And he was talking to me about steam tables and about phase diagrams. If you remember your chemistry classes, if you're not a scientist, and you know, for any given pressure and temperature, we can tell you whether or not water is going to be liquid or a crystal or ice or vapor. Well, Jerry was talking about this in the context of medicine. Go back a year and a half, and lots of people, myself included, would have told you if we wanted to graph risk for a bad case of COVID-19, we had to look at age and immune status. Well, we were right, but we weren't completely right. There's a lot of other factors, we don't even know them now, which go into this. And what Jerry taught me was that we need to think about research data in this context. We need to lay it out in a way that, and this is a very simple two-dimensional representation, but imagine a multi-dimensional graph where we can look at the phase transitions, the mathematical lines that delineate when a patient doesn't need to be treated to when they can get a current therapy, what therapy it should be. Maybe current therapies aren't good for them. We should give them an experimental therapy. What's the best one we can give them? And as we look at the n-dimensional, again, coming out of the page and other dimensions you can't visualize, as we think about all the different dimensions of a person, we need to figure out ways to incorporate all of that into this model. And it's not just our genes. It's the way our genes are transcribed. It's what we're exposed to. I can tell you a lot more about anybody's health from last week than I can from this is not true. I know biologists and physicians on the line will say, Glenn, your genes change, things in your immune system, things in cancers. Yes, but in general, most of the cells in our body have the same genetic makeup that we had when we were conceived. There's not a lot of benefit of time, but there's a lot of other things that happen to us over time. And what we need to do is stack all these things up. And I like the analogy of the Rosetta Stone, right? The Rosetta Stone was used to unlock a frankly dead language. We couldn't read it anymore as a civilization, even though it was written on all the buildings in one of the important parts of the history of our civilization. Anyway, we needed the same story told 3 different ways as a key. And if you think about all of the different multi-scale views of a person, my genes, what genes are on or off, what's happening in my organs, where I'm going, how I'm interacting with the environment around me, that really gives us a key that we can use as part of this process of evolving our view, constantly learning what is that best therapy for any patient at a given time. And that is really the future of life sciences. That is the future of us doing better healthcare. And I'll give you another example. Another great mentor of mine was Paul Herling. He was the head of research at Novartis, still does a lot of work in CNS conditions, a wonderful physician and scientist and teacher. And he originally told me what I'm going to tell you. So I am actually going to give you some medical news about the population at this conference. I have good news and bad news, actually. And so I'll give you the bad news first. The bad news is that if we looked in our brains, we'd actually have to cut them open and look, but we would find the plaques in almost everybody here, at least some of them, that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. They may not be causative. There's lots of debate about that, but they're definitely correlated. And the older you are, most of us, the more we have in our brain. So that's the bad news, is that almost everybody in this conference is at least on some trajectory to getting Alzheimer's disease. The good news is that most of us will die of cancer or heart disease first. And that is a somewhat, hopefully flip, but important metaphor for this diagram. This is how we need to think about the arc of disease progressions with that data I talked about. So I'll illustrate this from me. I made this diagram a few years ago. Presumably I'm closer, I'm 49, so I'm probably hopefully in the middle somewhere, but I'm certainly further towards the death line than I was when I first made this diagram. And I leave it to the audience, having heard me talk, to decide how far I am towards dementia. But there's the line of dementia and there's the line of death. And the question is Alzheimer's disease or some neurodegenerative condition or some cancer or some type of heart disease going to affect me clinically before I die of something else? And if we can start to use that data, use those phase diagrams and understand the arcs, this is how, not just for one medicine, not just for one medical device, but we can choose from all of them, transform the way we do healthcare by transforming the way we do research to actually come down to getting that right treatment on an individual basis for the right patient at the right time, because we've looked at the population the right way. So thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate being asked to participate. And I'm not sure what amount of time there is left for questions, but if there is, I'm happy to take some, or I will leave you to the conference.
Sure. Thank you so much for the excellent lectures. There is actually a questions at the backstage that a student is asking. He's currently struggling with 2A ANOVA, and what are some words that you'd love to share with students taking stats courses?
My words for people taking stats courses are to find, maybe this just works for me. I'm a very visual, geometric thinker. Find a real world physical example that you can use to replicate whatever kind of analysis it is that you're trying to do. And I have found that to be incredibly useful for me in wrapping my minds around any kind of more algebraic or mathematical representation of the same problem. I'm not sure if that's good advice or not, but it was good advice for me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for this lecture series. We don't have any more questions at the backstage. So I guess that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for participating. Okay. And we will be having our last speaker today coming up soon. So please allow for a few seconds to wait for our speakers to attend. Okay, so let me now move to our second keynote speech, and it's the last session today. Now our guest is Qi Liu, the founder and CEO of Miracle Plus. He is dedicated in investing and accelerating early stage tech-driven startups, and he received his PhD at Carnegie Mellon University. He also serves as the former president and COO of Baidu and the former executive vice president of Microsoft and Yahoo. So let's welcome him.
Hi, everyone. Well, first of all, it's a great, I had the opportunity to participate the 10th CMU Innovation Summit. And I just tried to share my PowerPoint. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we could say it clearly.
Okay, so I believe I have 30 minutes, is that right?
Yes, right.
Okay, great. So what I would like to take this opportunity is to talk about the central theme of today's event, which is about US-China innovation and entrepreneurism. As we all know, the world is entering a very, very different times. And innovation, and particularly new waves of global innovation with the United States and China as two primary innovation ecosystem is shaping up in important ways. CMU is one of the very, very best institutions. You all will be at the frontiers of the new waves of that global innovation. what I would like to talk about is share some of my perspective and experience on how we can ride the next waves of such global innovation with the United States and China as the two leading innovation ecosystem. So in order to see and identify these new innovation frontier, sometimes look back from the history can help us to identify these opportunities. What I will start with is this picture, which I like. What this picture says is, throughout human histories, there's always different phases of opportunities in terms of human professions, because different stage of society, the primary technology that's driving economic development are in different nature, and therefore different human professions at those era will be the leading human activities, creating wealth, driving economic development, and bringing innovations. As you can see, at certain times, hunter, a farmer, a merchant, industrialist will be the best profession. As we're into this century, it's clear startup founders are the primary human professions that's driving the bulk of wealth creation. In our next slide, we'll talk about the fundamental reason why. And then I also added another, I edited this pictures you can find on the web. I also added a new frontier. The obvious question is, let's say, today, being an entrepreneur is, I think it's pretty clear to most of you, is actually the best human profession in terms of creating wealth and driving innovation. Then the obvious question is, what's the next frontier? What's the next human professions will be the ones that's driving even greater innovations and the wealth creation? And in my views, is research, but researchers that are organized in a different form, not in today's academic ivory tower matters. And there's profound reason why. So this picture gives us a thumbnail view of, in history, being an entrepreneur and going forward, a researcher will be the human activities driving the most innovation and the wealth creation. And the next slides shows the fundamental reason why. And again, looking back in human history, we will see the structure, the primary driver that explains this phenomenon. So if you look at this chart on the X scale, is history of time, and also underneath, the key drivers driving human societal progress, particularly wealth creation, economic activities. The y-axis are the scale of economics. And first, the key drivers are general purpose technology. That is beyond doubt. Different phases of society are driven by different areas of primary general purpose technologies. And this list comes from Wikipedia. It's sort of commonly accepted by our study of history. And the more important one is the structure that's driving technology-driven progress. And the structure, the fundamental deep structure is information and energy. Regardless of the different shape and particular type of technology, the key structure that's enduring, that will tell us a lot, is information and energy. there's only three phases, three types of wealth creation systems driven by information tech and energy. The first is agricultural era. The second is the industrial era. And the third is that blue curve, the S curve is going up rapidly. That's the information era. In agricultural era, this S curve is flat, thousands of years history. Is because the information, the energy structure is very, very simple and unique. The energy is solar radiation. Essentially, nuclear fusions happen in a very distant apart, and it's free from human perspective. And the energy transformation is photosynthesis. And the information of creating wealth is very simple. So therefore, the human activity in those areas are just simple labors and the very, very simple tools. And you can have the world's best people, the smartest people. If you only have 2 acres of land, that's how much you can produce. And the industrial areas, the S curve goes up a lot faster because the energy is fossil energy. And typically is in terms of transmission and ease of consumption of energies is typically done in electricity. Different industrial areas will have different energy transformation. I'll talk about it a bit later. So, but the fossil energy, electricity, enable us to use mechanical process, electro process, or electromagnetic process to transfer energy. So whatever the consensus expectation. Hello? Sorry. Okay, I heard some background sound. So the industrial areas of wealth creation, the process is more complex because we need to use equipment. The human activities are more involved, will require human skills, such as tailors, designers, workers, lawyers, and all that. And the blue curve started in the middle of last century. What happened was we invented the general purpose computer. And the information is being harnessed and processed through computing in a dramatically more efficient way. And the human activity moved towards innovation, which is quickly understand human needs, recombine energies and the resources, particularly new form of energies, which I'll talk about. No longer just the fossil energies. To meet human needs in a rapid way and creating wealth at dramatically improved speed. It is beyond clear now. All the companies that have leading market cap are all on that blue curve. Whatever you do, you want to make sure that you are on that blue curve, which is using computation, using digital technology to fulfill human needs, creating wealth in a much more rapid way. And this is the primary trend. And that has implications on what we're talking about, China, United States, because those development involves human activities and also systems of human activities. And it also has region geography implications as well, if we study human history and look forward. So this picture gives us a view about the primary driver, information and energy, and the structure on how innovation happens over history of time. And next slide, this slide is sort of the key. I want to just explain how we see the innovation frontier in the United States and in China. And briefly, on the leftmost hand, the leftmost side is the different era of economic development. Agriculture era, industrial era, 1.0 is a mechanical form of energy transformation. 2.0 is the electrical form of transfer energy. And 3.0 is electronic way of transforming energy. And the information era is computation driven. That's sort of economic phase. But the key is, let's look at within those phases, how science and technology is evolving. Science goes through 4 different paradigms. In the agriculture era, is essentially thought development, individual thinkers, start from the Greek days, ancient Chinese days. There are important formulation of hypotheses, but isolated in individual humans. Science and technology develops in organized forms in industrial era, starting the early times of Renaissance. There we have more needs for those skills and knowledge. So therefore we have university, engineers, scientists become a human profession. And then in the information era, science technology is developing with the aid of computation, particularly the era we are in today. There's a movement driven a lot by Microsoft. It's called the fourth paradigm of science, driven by data and computation. And then you have research university. That the dominant forms is created in the United States in 1944 by President Roosevelt and a gentleman named Vannevar Bush. There's a well-known essay and the leading paradigm called Science, the Endless Frontier, which is large-scale federal funding, research university, national labs. Funding comes from federal government, but scientists self-direct with students, graduate students. And that paradigm dominant until today. It no longer is enough to lead the future. And the economic development, I will briefly talk about just to make sure that we cover the base. In the agriculture areas, 1 + 1 = 2, because if you have 1 acre of land, you produce X. If I give you another acre, you produce 2X. In industrial area, it's different. You actually produce more. If I have 1 plant, I produce some widgets. If I have 2 plants, I actually produce more widgets than 1 + 1, because I have further division of specialization of human labor. That's sort of the core economic thesis of industrial era. You're producing more with scale. In the information era, 1 + 1 is greater than 4, because we are not only compounding at the industrial specialization rate, because human knowledge, particularly through software, is accumulating at a faster rate. So this is why if you buy stock for Microsoft, Amazon, Google, if you hold them, these stocks go up a lot faster because they aggregate knowledge and the compound their economic accumulation, economic value at a much faster rate. And this have geography implications. This is where sort of the US-China thing is interesting from my perspective. Because if you look at the history, the science and technology initially, particularly industrial revolution, start from UK. There's a fundamental reason why, because the leading theory is mostly developed in the United Kingdom, and then moved to Germany and Europe, continental Europe. And then when they're at the third era of industrial revolution, it's moved to the United States, to North America. The United States led the world over the last 100 years plus. But in my view, clearly that's shifting towards Asia. There's important reason, particularly when you think about the fourth paradigm of scientific development. It's driven by computation data. And population size and economic opportunities, it's no question the center will be shifting to Asia, and China will be the primary center of that shift. And the human activities with labor, skills to research and development and innovation, which is assessing human needs, combine resources in a rapid way. So this is the history patterns, give us important lens to look into why United States and China are the primary two innovation ecosystems, particularly China as the rapid rising one. In terms of sheer scale, over the coming few decades, I think it's very clear the China-based innovation ecosystem will outpace the US-based innovation ecosystem. And then let's look at the emergence of China innovation ecosystem. First of all, any innovation ecosystem, you have the core foundation of these four elements. You need to have talent, lots of capital, enough technology, and a lot of market opportunities. China has all those now. Compared to the United States, talent and technology, the US have still the leading top tiers of talent, the very leading edge of technology, but the gap is closing at a pretty fast pace. And in terms of development systems, in terms of science and technology, research university, China sort of replicating the United States model. National labs similar. But there's a massive push towards self-reliant core tech ecosystem, largely due to the tension of the geopolitical environment, that sort of the headwinds. And then China is launching into very interesting phenomena. I sort of look at a lot of those. These are mega cities. There are three one is centered around Beijing, one is centered around Shenzhen, one is centered around Shanghai. They have what I called research foundries. The government spent lots of capital on research foundries, facility shared labs, financing into information science, life science, and material science. And the support of entrepreneurs is sort of massive. Every cities will have financing, building equipment to help startup founders to start their new businesses. And there's also a diverse macroeconomic drivers in terms of Chinese economy. Technology is the main driver for the next few decades of China's. And domestic consumption, because the income keep rising, will be another key driver. And then there will be 2 more decades of urbanization and the policy change causing China to add more population. And the 5th one is really interesting. What I call it's a stratified economy. And the innovation target is very different from the United States. A simple thing I would share with you, probably all familiar, Pinduoduo, which I'm on their board, a company like a Meituan, the United States will not be the place to have companies like that. It is impossible because the labor cost structure. United States actually is not the ideal target market for innovation because everything is industrialized. Even agriculture is industrialized. So China actually has 4 tiers economy, but China has leading tech companies, has large army of developers and supply of talent. And those outcomes, those innovations can rapidly cover the rest of Southeast Asia, Latin America, Middle East, Africa. So I didn't realize this until I moved back to China, worked it for a while. I had a brief conversation with, interesting conversation with Larry Summers, was former President of Harvard, US Treasury Secretary. And he asked me, Chi, China has a quarter of US GDP per capita. How come you have leading tech companies, leading cloud infrastructures? The reason is China's economy is stratified. In my views, the tier 1, strata 1 Chinese economy is similar to just the same as Silicon Valley. At Baidu, we pay Google salary. The infrastructure is pretty much the same. English is the working language. The Baidu's tech is actually, in my view, is sort of slightly better than Microsoft. So, this is why you see this diverse structure. And the overall environment, there's sort of a new infrastructure, government policies, and geography spill over to other regions. So if you add it up, it's a very, very interesting innovation ecosystem. If you sort of live, study there, you will see this is why it's interesting. Because of time, I'm going to just speed through the next few slides. The key is now how do we identify and seeding those opportunities as entrepreneur, as researcher, particularly in terms of wealth creation, innovation. You need to look at the user needs, the technology, and the market structure so that the three works in unison. That's where the real innovation opportunities are. Particularly, you need to look at the technology trend. Where's the new frontier of technology? What type of human needs can be better served? And what are the products in terms of serving those needs can become market viable? And then you have real good opportunity to drive wealth and creating values. In terms of technology, this picture summarizes, in my view, is the whole new frontier. Information technology is still the primary driver. There's front end, back end. You're all in CMU, familiar most of this. The main frontier driving today's IT technology is still mobile and the cloud, but AI and the edge and the 5G is emerging as the new frontier. And I won't belabor sort of each of the details, just to call out some of the new tech frontiers that are worth our attention. First is video native enabled new form of interactions, video native enabled new form of infrastructures. You have Clubhouse, you have TikTok, you have Agora. All those are new overlay networks. You have data centers, network links. You provide additional software. You open up new kinds of content, community, social networks, and commerce. On AI, the opportunity is truly broad and vast because the nature of AI is a new way of computing. Instead of symbol and numbers, these are superimposed vectors of floats, and you can quickly learn feature representations, and those representations can be disentangled quickly to solve interesting problems. So therefore, we have all kinds of new opportunities. And the current primary frontier is electronic vehicles. And I will ask everyone to pay attention because this is clearly the center, the epic center of new IT technology. A car, most people don't realize the electronic vehicle will have 500 million lines of code in it. It's clearly a software-defined device. And it will drive new energy. This is why Tesla is so interesting. This is why these companies are drawing so much attention, because the opportunity they represent is the center of energy transformation and IT technology. And then there you have energy, which is storage, renewable. The holy grail will be nuclear fusion, controlled fusion. There's lots and lots of activities going on. Life science is going through a sea change. It will be computation, data-driven in pretty much every aspect of it. Material science is sort of always structure and the processes, but will become computation data-driven in the next 5 to 10 years. Then there's space exploration and all those. And into the human needs, I won't talk about too much. What I recommend you is look at the consumer needs, look at the different age groups in 24 hours, how they spend their times, and then we'll see those opportunities. And whether it's a new type of commerce, new type of social community, particularly gaming, these are software-defined human experience. And then in terms of business, it is the same. The business always wants to produce more values to reduce cost, and business always needs more IT tools. And I have 1 minute left. What I would say is this is a very, very interesting opportunity. Particularly, I spoke mostly through the lens of China. The United States is interesting. The United States, in my view, only have one catalyst, which is technology. Another one is immigration. But the US government tried to screw that up pretty alarmingly. Sort of the one big advantage is immigration. And hopefully, with a lot of good things going on with the federal government, with Biden administration, we can sort of do a better job in that. But key is each one of us, doesn't matter whether you choose to be in the United States, in China, you have opportunity to participate, make a huge difference. The key is we need to overcome today's headwind of geopolitical environment. As entrepreneurs, as innovators, we gotta work together in one single global community, communicate, help each other. This is where what I'm currently doing coming in. My organization is called Miracle Plus. It's previously is YC China. It is actually simply for geopolitical climate reasons. YC decided not to continue YC China. And I myself, my team decided to carry the banner forward because the Chinese entrepreneurs deserve a greater opportunity, better help. And if each of you are interested in, we offer very much a localized program for entrepreneurs with China market as the primary target. You are all welcome to participate. We offer standard deals. It's actually a much better deal than YC, $300,000 for 7% of equity stake. And work together, solve the key problem of from 0 to 1, which is speed up product market fit. And we already, within a year and a half, we already invested in 88 companies. They're all fantastic founders with great potentials to make a difference. That's the end of my 31 minutes. I do very much appreciate the time. And thank you all for the opportunity for me to share with you my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doctor. So we have 2 questions at the backstage. The first question is, what do you think will be the greatest challenge for China's stereotype innovation targets model? Would it make social goods more satisfied?
Can you repeat the question? Make sure that I understand correctly.
Yeah, you could also see the questions at the backstage. So it's asking, what do you think will be the greatest challenge for China's?
Okay, I can see let me just read it.
Yes,
what do you
right.
think will be the greatest challenge for China's strata-tier innovation target model? Would it make social goods more stratified? So it's not an intention by design. I would say that I sort of realized that. Because how do you answer the question Larry Summers posed to me? China with a quarter of GDP per capita of the United States, but yet China is the only region, only geography outside the United States have leading tier tech companies, cloud infrastructures, a bigger army of developer pools, and have pretty much top tiers of leading market cap companies. The only way you can see that is because the Chinese economy is stratified. It is not by design. It's sort of natural evolution. I'm in Beijing, in Shanghai, when you live there, you can see it. All those strata sort of show up in one city. There are different income levels. They sort of work in different types of jobs. So that's a reflection of the evolution path forward and the history where China's economic growth come from. So it's not a intentional design model. So therefore, the greatest challenges in terms of the stratified model, I wouldn't frame it that way. I would say, what are the greatest opportunity? The greatest opportunity is the China's innovation ecosystem can produce company like a Pinduoduo that can work with a new commerce engine for economy like, let's say, Indonesia, Brazil. The United States won't be in a position to produce that kind of company. It is just impossible because the labor cost, the structure of agriculture in the United States, which is industrialized, it's impossible, right? So when I was at Microsoft, when we have board meetings, we call the tech industry is designed for American, tweak slightly, sell global business. That's good, but not good enough, because the United States cannot invent companies that works well for other regions that doesn't look like the United States. Let me give you another example. When I was at Baidu, we look at the smart speakers, the voice assistant, and then we look at the team. I used to have the Microsoft. We were optimizing acoustic environment for 5 meters, 10 meters, all optimized for that, whether it's Alexa, Google Assistant. But look at the Chinese family homes. Which homes, typical home, will have 5 to 10 meters of distance to the speakers? If you look at the home in Japan, in India, in Brazil, they look similar to the United States. North America is an outlier. The North America home is an outlier in the world, not the norm. So therefore, we should have a very positive view to say the Chinese economy with leading tier tech company is a blessing. Innovation is the only way to lift more poverty, lift more people out of poverty, give them better lives, versus turn around to say, what are your challenges? I would say, let's look from the right lens. It's not by design intention. It's a history of how things evolve. So this is how I will answer the first question. So let me take the second question, then I'm done. So it said, I recently joined the Miracle Plus as a fellow. I have two questions. Actually, I have two questions. So in your opinion, what role Miracle Plus can play as a new form of early stage venture capital in YC style to help boost China's innovation ecosystem? Great question. I will talk about. And the second is, what do you think about recent trends of metaverse? That's interesting. So first of all, what our role play? Our role play is essentially the role YC plays. In my views, YC is essentially a graduate school for entrepreneurs, because in universities, today's university, in my view, is just not sufficient. They're not producing the type of innovators the society needs. YC essentially is fulfilling that needs in the United States. I worked at the YC for a year. I also knew Paul Grant, because we worked together at Yahoo. So when YC started in 2005, I went to Harvard to help Paul and Jessica so initially their efforts. So I sort of know YC from the very beginning. Very much share their belief, align with their thinkings of helping entrepreneurs. So our role is to fill that gap in China, because YC's coaching doesn't work in China. This is why YC actually have very few over the last 16 years. Maybe you only have a couple dozen people from China that YC decide to fund. Because in YC, they will teach you, how to drive your growth from Instagram and all that, from Google, Facebook. China's structure of the internet is so different. So the YC model, cannot really help Chinese entrepreneurs. So this is why Sam ultimately recruited me for 6 years to say, let's go back to China. Let's create a localized version, because China's innovation ecosystem is just very different from the United States. If you sort of live in China, you feel the sort of the big difference. So our role is essentially for that role, and our vision and the mission is to build a large scale community, so that the community can help more and more Chinese startup founders, just like YC is doing for the United States. That's our role. And about metaverse, this is certainly very interesting for me personally. I also, with some of my team members at the Miracle Plus, we keep looking for great founders, teams in this particular space to invest in them, to help them. My view on this is essentially in terms of human experience, software-driven innovation can fulfill human needs, particularly spiritual, experiential needs, in a much more rapid way. And the metaverse is potentially a large swaths of opportunities, can drive substantial progress in that arena. So net is, we view that as one of the big opportunities on the horizon. And we're always actively looking for great founders to invest in them. And hopefully we can work together in those areas with many of you potentially you know of or you are interested in. You are more than welcome to reach out to us and we can talk about what are the potential possibilities that lies ahead. So that would be my quick answers to the top 2 questions. Again, I do want to thank you again for the opportunity to share my thoughts and answer your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for the speak and the question answers.
Great. Bye now.
So now it's the end of the first session of our summit, and we will be starting our next session at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time this night. So in the next session, we will have a panel discussions on creativity in new media and 2 keynote speeches and part 2 lecture series. So if you have more questions or you wanted to know more about our CMU Summit, we have our contact information on the right side of the slides. So please feel free to reach out or to subscribe to our channels, to our accounts, or go to our websites to learn more about CMU Summit. And thank you for all the participants attending today and all the audiences. Thank you all for your time. Thank you.
The CMU Summit on U.S.-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship is a bilateral student organization with the goal of connecting scholars and startups with leading expertise. We feature high-profile forum, venture competition, and career fairs that gathers different parties to address real-world challenges. We've connected 7,000-plus audiences, involved 800-plus startup projects, reached out to 500-plus industry leaders, and presented ourselves on 100-plus media outlets worldwide over the past decade. In April 2012, we hosted the first CMU Summit and the first New Venture Competition with CMU CASB and CMU CSSA. 38 experts presented their insights on 5 panels. More than 600 participants from 30 cities attended the conference. In January 2018, together with CMU Silicon Valley campus, we held the first CMU Silicon Valley Artificial Intelligence Summit. This summit featured elite forums, startup demos, job fairs, and networking luncheon. In November 2018, in partnership with CMU UEA and CMU GEC, we hosted Hack a Startup Business Competition. Participants, regardless of age, major, or experiences, are welcome. In 2019 fall, CMU Summit collaborated with CMU CPDC to introduce the Global Opportunities Fair, the biggest fair for international students in CMU. This fair had over 1,000-plus students participated, and companies such as Sony, Tata Group, and Tencent attended. CMU Summit has accomplished its first 10 years journey. During the past decade, we continuously rethink on the past and looking forward to starting our journey for the next decade coming. We are excited to present our 10th CMU Summit to you in this April.
Welcome, everyone, to the 10th CMU Summit on U.S.-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship. The CMU Summit was founded in 2012 with a mission of building a bilateral bridge for communications and collaborations between the U.S. and China in fields of innovation and entrepreneurship, supporting innovators and entrepreneurs from both countries and facilitating technological and business development. Over the past decade, the CMU Summit has grown to become one of the most prominent innovation-centered summits held by a student organization in North America. Our summit and New Venture Competition have attracted over 7,000 audience, 800 startup projects, 500 industry leaders, and are covered by over 100 media outlets worldwide. We are now a CMU-recognized student organization based at Sports Center for Entrepreneurship. We have over 60 active members ranging from freshmen to PhD students from all 7 colleges at CMU. Our 5 departments include conference, competition, external, marketing, and finance. Due to the ongoing pandemic, we have moved the 10th CMU Summit online. This year, at the start of a new decade, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of our CMU Summit. At the start of 2020s, we would also like to invite you to join us to review the past decade of technological advancement and consider possibilities for innovations in the years to come. To present you with unique perspectives and diverse views, we have invited over 40 esteemed speakers, including prominent scholars, industry leaders, esteemed venture capitalists, and promising entrepreneurs. On behalf of the 10th CMU Summit on US-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship, I would like to give special thanks to all of our speakers, partners, collaborators, and sponsors. We couldn't have gone this far without you. I would also like to thank all the participants for your interest in the 10th CMU Summit. We hope that our 10th CMU Summit will inspire you with new ideas and opportunities, and we wish you every success in your career and studies. Thank you.
The 10th CMU Summit is held from April the 23rd to 25th through online platforms. This year, over 40 guest speakers will participate in our event. In keynote speech, speakers will combine entrepreneurship, technology, and businesses to guide the pioneers of the future in the 30-minute talk. In panel discussion, professionals will cover 7 topics, including creativity in new media, smart infrastructure, smart commuting, robotics, VR and AR, online education, and biotechnology. Also, we will hold a new session lecture series where lecturers will talk about how new technologies drive the transformation of traditional industries. Besides, we provide startups with communication channels. We held new venture competitions in the past several years. In this year's summit, to adapt to this virtual event, our demo day allows entrepreneurs to showcase their businesses to investors, as we intend to provide more exposure for early startups with a wider range of audiences. During our summit, we also provide perfect opportunities to connect companies with CMU students through a career fair. Every year, companies interact with students, give their resumes, and conduct on-site interviews.
As the influence of CMU Summit continue to grow, we also collaborate with CMU's official career center, CPDC, to organize Global Opportunities Fair for international students. In this career fair, companies are willing to provide visa sponsorship within the US or job opportunities around the globe. This career fair has now become the largest international student job fair, and we have become the first student organization to collaborate with CPDC to organize such a school-wide event. Up until now, this career fair has more than 1,300 students to participate and leading position companies such as Tencent, Sony, and Tata Group to attend. On the other side, we also have collaboration with CMU Alumni Network to connect their resources to our students. We initiate an alumni interview program where outstanding alumni can share their career advice, personal experiences, and insights to fellow students. We strive to build a resource chain that unites alumni, companies, and students all together. And we believe this platform will foster collaboration when facing challenges and opportunities in the future.
Hey all, I'm Betty, the founder of the CMU Summit organization and the president of the 6th CMU Summit on US-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship. In July 2016, we transitioned from the annual event to a CMU recognized organization with the purpose to better serve our mission. It's unbelievable that it is already the 10th anniversary of the CMU Summit. Congratulations on all the achievements. I wish to express my sincere appreciation to the current executive committee, CMU Summit's alumni, partners, and all the speakers, collaborators, media, and sponsors who have supported us. Thank you for being part of our organization's success over the past 10 years. I believe we could together co-create an even more remarkable CMU Summit in the next decade. I look forward to seeing you all at the 10th anniversary.
Hello, congratulations on the 10th anniversary of the Summit event, a student-led event on innovation and entrepreneurship. I participated a few years back. Specifically, I was happy to contribute to a conversation on fundamental research and innovation in robotics, with fantastic opportunities for scholars and students to discuss current research topics. Congratulations again.
I'm Teresa Trombetta, Assistant Vice President for Alumni and Constituent Engagement at CMU. And I'd like to thank all of the students, faculty, staff, and alumni who have come together to build this year's engaging list of speakers and panelists. We're excited to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the CMU Summit and hope that you'll join us and Tartans from around the world during this year's virtual programming.
Hello, I'm Mimi Fairman, the Executive Director of International Development here at CMU. My team works with internationally based alumni and families, helping connect them to each other and to the university. This 10th anniversary of the CMU Summit on US-China Innovation and Entrepreneurship is an incredible milestone. I would like to thank and congratulate all the students over this past decade who have contributed to this success. Over the years, the summit has provided a platform for students, alumni, parents, and friends of the university interested in innovation and entrepreneurship to connect and collaborate. I also want to thank the sponsors and donors who each year make this event possible. I'm looking forward to this year's exciting virtual program and to meeting again in person with all of you in future years.
Hi, my name is Jeff Jeffries from the Career and Professional Development Center at Carnegie Mellon University. I would like to congratulate the Summit for their 10-year anniversary and to all the alumni and current students for all the success they've had over the years. And from all of us at the Career and Professional Development Center, we would like to thank you for your continued partnership, and we look forward to another great year.
CMU Summit, happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit, happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit,
Happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit.
CMU Summit, happy 10th.
happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit,
Happy 10th
anniversary.
CMU Summit. CMU Summit. Happy 10th.
CMU Summit, happy 10th. CMU Summit, happy 10th.
CMU Summit. Happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit, happy 10th.
CMU Summit, happy 10th.
Happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit.
CMU Summit.
CMU Summit, happy 10th. Happy 10th anniversary.
CMU Summit, happy 10th.
Happy 10th anniversary.
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 CMU Summit, happy 10th anniversary.